Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week for a special The Last of Us 2 spoiler episode, we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on, nerds?
What is going on? And we have Frank Pisani joining us. How you doing, Frank?
Doing pretty good.
Doing good. All right. So this is a follow-up to our retrospective look back at The Last of Us Part 1 from a month or two back, I guess, probably at this point, which was the three of us as well as Logan who sat down and really kind of went in and dove into that game. Right. You were there with us on that one, Cameron, right? No, you weren't. Okay.
No, because I didn't replay The Last of Us. So,
That's okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. Never mind.
I hate The Last of Us.
That's right. I'm forgetting things that are happening in this quarantine world. And it's interesting because this is definitely going to be an interesting episode because I finished The Last of Us Part 2 like a month ago at this point probably, and was the one that was working on and writing up the review for us. And I had something written. I had 1,000+ words written on it, and I just could never bring myself to go back and finish that. And so in my Google Docs, there's just an unfinished The Last of Us Part 2 review out there. In part, we talked about this on one of the recent That Nerdy Site episodes. It was just I love a lot about the game, but I also have a lot of conflicted feelings, and there's so much of the game that I feel like I can't effectively talk about in a written review setting because I don't want to spoil key moments of the game, and about half the game could be considered a spoilery kind of thing. So so it didn't really make I don't think you can effectively as effectively write a spoiler-free review of that game as you can do a spoiler-filled review of that game. And so I was playing around with the idea of what I did for Final Fantasy VII Remake, where I basically did okay, here's the spoiler-free review, and then here's the spoilery chunk at the bottom. But I just couldn't figure out a way to get that to work that I was happy with, and so it just kind of fell by the wayside, and I just haven't really been compelled to go back and revisit it. I think
that is oddly thematic,
yeah,
considering the game.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. So we will dive into a lot of my thoughts, but at the same time, a lot of my thoughts are, it's not a game I've found I find myself occasionally thinking about it and thinking about the themes and stuff, but I feel like this game has not stuck with me as much as the original Last of Us did. Obviously we're only a month or two removed, so who knows how that will, stick over time or whatever. But yeah, I think that's kind of just one of my general overall thoughts on the game that we will dive into a little bit more. Those unfamiliar with how we do things similar to a lot of how a lot of places do these kinds of things, where we'll kind of talk about spoiler-free stuff first, and then we'll dive into kind of our more in-depth spoiler discussions, talking about our favorite characters, the plot elements we liked, didn't like, some of the big major plot twists or story beats or whatever, and kind of all that stuff, as well as of course gameplay and whatnot. Before we dive into that, a little bit of housekeeping. If you like what you hear, please remember that you can always subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can, and if you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, just like all of our wonderful Patreon producers for the month of August here did. Pam and Bev Larson, Sherry Starkey, Teresa Wilkinson, and myself, Trevor Starkey. So thank you to all of them / me, which is always weird, for giving the site some support. Fun fact, I originally registered thatnerdysite.com a year ago in August, so we just got hit with our first New Year's bill of maintaining the website, and I was like, cool, we more or less have covered costs for this first year thanks to our Patreon supporters. So again, shout out to everybody who has helped us out over there over the past we haven't fully reached a year, but we're getting close. So shout out to all that. But yeah, let's dive into kind of some spoiler-free impressions first. So as I started to say before we got kind of sidetracked there a little bit, Logan, who was on our spoiler cast version for the original Last of Us, the original Last of Us being like his favorite game of all time, he has not yet started playing The Last of Us Part 2. He just, as somebody, he's one of those people in the camp of like, he didn't really ever see the need for a sequel, and he just hasn't been in the mindset to dive into it yet. So he has not. So that's why he's not here. But Cam, Frank, and I all sat down, played it,
and I'm here instead.
And Cam is here instead. And Frank and I obviously are also coming at it from the context of having recently just replayed the original Last of Us. So this is kind of a follow-up companion to that, with just a little bit of the personalities here swapped. But let's dive in, kind of kicking it off with spoiler-free impressions first. What did we think in general of The Last of Us Part 2? Frank, I will kick it over to you first.
I really enjoyed it. I feel like I definitely am much more positive about it than possibly even like you guys and a lot of people just like on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Last of Us 1, and I do have some criticisms that like I had against it that I feel like a lot of people don't normally raise, and I haven't like fully ever gone into it, even like during the spoiler cast, because I don't want to just seem like I was like bagging on the game. But in this case, like going into part 2, I feel like they fixed a lot of the problems I had, especially in like a gameplay sense. And I felt like it actually was like a much better game to actually like play and play through, and it was much more enjoyable. And especially like when you did get into some of those firefights, I feel like it actually had some like the most fun and unique and like dynamic combat encounters I've like ever experienced. And it was so fun to just see all these kind of moving pieces like interact with each other. And when we get into the spoiler section, I mean, I'll probably get a little bit deeper into that, but like I think that was definitely a highlight. And I did enjoy the story, and I can definitely understand the argument, and I'd probably even agree with it, that maybe the story in The Last of Us 1 was just entirely stronger than probably what we get here. But I still thought it was a really well told story, really well acted. I really enjoyed every time I got to a cutscene, and I'm like, cool, we can just sit here and I can basically watch this movie that's like fully acted out, and then kind of pick up and early in the game I was almost like disappointed when I had to pick up the controller, because I'm like, no, just keep going, just keep telling me the story, like I want to know what's going on here, like.
Mm-hmm.
So that I enjoyed it overall, like I feel very positive about it.
Yeah. How about you, Cam? And this is weird because I as Cam was playing the game, I had a lot of like back and forth conversations with Cam about it, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I gave you my extra copy of the game, right, Cam?
Yeah,
that was we exchanged that at the Chipotle when we met up. Yeah,
the social distance Chipotle that we had.
Yeah,
you slid it across the table like a drug deal. You just like,
pretty much. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it was because that was. I was probably already like halfway through the game at that point, I think, when I handed that off to you, because I had, I'd bought the digital copy as well as like a collector's edition. So I was like, here, you can have the collector's edition version of the game. But
I was waiting until I got paid that following Thursday.
Right.
And
yeah.
so you were like, oh, let's just nip that in the bud.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool. All right.
But yeah, so it's interesting because I already know, some of your thoughts, because I was well ahead of you throughout the game, so you were kind of like chiming in and throwing stuff at me as you were playing. So it's interesting because I don't think we've really had the like in quote unquote in person kind of conversation since finishing it, outside of like a few texts back and forth. So I'm very eager to hear your completed thoughts of the game. But yeah, hit us with your spoiler free stuff first.
So first, I have to say, I'm sure a lot of people are expecting me to be hating on this game, because as immortalized in the Ultimate Video Game podcast, or Ultimate Video Game List show podcast, I am the villain that prevented The Last of Us Part 2 from even having a chance of winning, and got a PS Vita Persona 4 Golden to put above it.
Yeah, I'm still with you on that. Like I have your back.
Of course you were. That was your game.
It was his game. But importantly enough, like I've made very what I felt like were very salient points on how The Last of Us is story-wise. I think will always be immortalized as like a really fantastically told story about and I've mentioned this before, but like the kind of like prestige where like it tricks you into thinking throughout the game that Joel is being redeemed, or that he's actually becoming like like, oh, he's actually a good person, or it's revealing that he's actually a good person down beneath, and it's like, oh, nope, nope. Like, it's such great storytelling, and like just perfect moments and story beats. But gameplay wise, I've always said it, like, resources are a nightmare. Like, gameplay wise, like, it like the game never gives you options really, other than making you do what it wants you to do, because otherwise you won't make it past. And so it acts more like a like cheat puzzle in some parts of that game. And then it'll all of a sudden overwhelm you with just like hordes, and you're expected to be like able to like blow your way through it with like not great shooting gameplay. Um, I like in total flip of that, I found engaging in traversing the world and the fighting and like like, so basically everything I felt that was bad about The Last of Us Part One, in like in hindsight, is now like they have totally addressed almost every single one of my concerns that I had going into this game, with its gameplay and combat and exploration. Um, it's it's definitely flipped that on its head, and in a interesting fashion has like, I'm very conflicted about the story even to this point in today. Like, I wrote down like literally like 2.5 pages of notes, on small paper though, not big paper, like small notebook paper,
Mm-hmm.
um, about things that definitely I wanted to hit on, and we'll get into once we start talking about spoiler stuff. But um, overall impression of the game is, as a game, like the actual gameplay as a game, this game is like really stellar. The like We'll get more into it when we talk about gameplay, but there's so much about the gameplay mechanics of this game that I felt worked so incredibly well, that I was kind of like flabbergasted almost. So
Cool. Yeah, for me, especially as somebody who's like writing the review for the game, it, I mean, like, my review was somewhere in the 9.95 range. I think it does a lot of really, really phenomenal stuff. So for us, 9.95 is that incredible game, and 10 is that phenomenal. But so using that word, it's like, well, it misses the mark in enough things that just kept it from being like a 10 out of 10 game for me. In particular, like, the pacing, I think, is my biggest gripe with the game. Whereas, like, the original Last of Us is, to kind of your point there, Frank, it's such a great, like, story, told incredibly, like, concisely, I think. And it's paced out really well, going, through the areas, through the seasons. And this game is easily 2+ times size of that, in terms of like the amount of stuff that they're packing into it, which is great and very beautiful and stuff. But it buckles under the weight of that, like, extra length, I think, at times, for me. Like, it especially, it reaches a point, which we'll get into here in a little bit, where I was like, oh, okay, so that gives me a sense of how much longer this game is. Man, it's already been a long game. Like, I was already ready for things to be wrapping up, and the fact that we're nowhere near that now is a lot to take. So, and admittedly, some of that is heavily fueled by the fact that I was, kind of pushing through and trying to get through this game as quickly as possible or whatever, so I could be, part of the kind of ongoing conversation, in our community sphere and stuff, before people just nonchalantly started spoiling everything online.
Like day 3, yeah.
Exactly. But so rushing through it, obviously makes it feel like that much more, as opposed to if I, paced it out, wasn't worried about spoilers or whatever, and just kind of like enjoyed it at my own pace. I probably would have enjoyed it, better. But it is still a long game, and I don't know if I needed, specifically the thing that I talked with Cam about is, because it's such a bigger game, there's a lot of, like, empty space between spaces. You
Mm.
know, going from like one combat arena to the next combat arena is a lot of traversing through empty buildings or buildings with like one or two drawers that you can open and maybe grab a piece of cloth in or something like that. Or, maybe there's a collectible off in the side of this building or something like that. And so there's a lot of extra space there just because the world that they've created is so big. And I don't know if like I would have preferred smaller corridors or smaller kind of like condensed stuff to help with the pacing there. Because yeah, like you guys kind of touched on, like when you're in those story moments and when you're in those cutscenes or whatever, like it's a very well told story and very compelling, but there is just enough in the on the gameplay side of things for me that was lacking. Just there was enough downtime where I was like, man, I don't want to have to like run through, especially as somebody who like went and got the platinum, so I played it like twice back to back basically. Or I played through the game and then I went and basically did like collectible cleanup through a second playthrough. So there were a lot of points where I was like, I know how much more I'm gonna have to like. I know where I need to get to now, and it's going to take me another 5 minutes to get there, kind of thing. It's a lot of the same. Like it was interesting realizing it that I had a lot of the same issues with Red Dead Redemption 2 as I was thinking about it, kind of in the immediate aftermath of the game. But I still love this significantly more than Red Dead 2 because Red Dead 2, as an open world game, is that much more aimless, and you have that much more time to get from like one side of the map to the other side of the map. At least in this, it's like, okay, you don't have to go to and from those sides of the map throughout the course of the game. You're still on a mostly linear path that is guiding you in one direction. So that definitely like alleviates some of it, but at its core, a lot of the like I had a lot of similar feelings from Red Dead Redemption 2. Great visuals, incredible like detail in the world, but did that detail always make for a more fun experience or for the most fun experience? And obviously calling something like Last of Us Part 2 fun is a mixed bag, but at the end of the day you're hoping for some element of fun in the game to help you tell the story, even if it is a very challenging story at times. So yeah, I think that's kind of my big like spoiler free stuff is like I very much love the game, but I also had enough like big problems with the game to keep it from like reaching that kind of top tier upper echelon that a game like the original Last of Us I think will end up sitting in, especially because the length of this game, it makes it significantly less like replayable. Like I can go in and sit down and I did a few years ago I went and played The Last of Us Part 1 as part of an Extra Life stream, basically knocked the whole game out in like 12 hours. This would take maybe generously the entirety of an Extra Life stream, and I don't know if I feel like that's a lot of Last of Us for one 24-hour sitting. So it'd be a tricky one. So it's one that I will see as kind of like just tougher to go back to for gameplay as much as a lot of the thematic elements that they really dive into. But at the same time, there is a lot here that is like going into this, I have always been like, I want a Last of Us Part 2 that deals with the ramifications of The Last of Us Part 1's ending. And so when like it pretty quickly becomes apparent that that's what this game is doing, I was very much along for the ride narratively. So I was very excited for that and to see how that was going to play out. It made a lot of like different choices than like the game I had in my head, but at the same time, like I liked the narrative choices they made here better than the half-baked, half-formed ones I would have had. So, yeah, I think that's
Oh, I
yeah.
was gonna
Go ahead.
say
Yeah, Cam.
what I was just gonna say. I know that you put it at the 9 to 9.5 scale. I would probably put this game, and this is kind of gonna sum up. I guess this is a good chance for Frank to also throw this in here. I would probably put it at an 8 to 8.5.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. To me, it's not incredible. There's too many detractions for me to make it a like it gets close to the 9. I know it. it's an 8.5 to a 9 for me,
Mm-hmm.
but like it's within that range, that scale. So
Yeah.
that kind of give people a heads up, and I guess that kind of tempers our approach a bit.
Yeah.
Frank, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm more on Trevor's side there, where I would say like 9.95. It definitely to me is not a 10, and in my book that's usually a hard score to obtain, although it is obtainable, and I definitely think this doesn't quite hit that, but I do think this does hit on like a lot of levels, and it is a really like great game that is like the Naughty Dog is like I feel like they're at like the top of their form
Mm-hmm.
almost like, and I'm excited to just see them keep going forward. And it's like, what are we going to get next? And it doesn't even have to be like Uncharted or The Last of Us. I'm just like, I want this storytelling, this dynamic gameplay. Like, I want to see more of this. So that's where I think it is a very like high quality game. But I also where you're coming from saying like 8.5 or 9, I don't even think that's like I don't think that's like either wrong either. Like I think that's a totally fair like review or kind of like way to feel about the game. But I definitely for me I think I'd say like 9.95.
Yeah, to that point, Frank, I think there is a lot of elements of this game that are absolutely Naughty Dog working on their on the best they've ever done. And in that same conversation, obviously, I think we should at least mention that seems to very much come along with the crunch culture of Naughty Dog, be that self-enforced. Because they're very passionate artists that want to produce the best of the best that they can, or if it's because that's just kind of the like working culture, and if everybody else is staying late, you're gonna have to stay late too. That's so there are moments when I was playing through this game where I was like, man, I'm sure somebody put so much time into that and probably didn't see their family for like a month because of this thing, and I'm conflicted on that. Especially at
Oh,
like
the ethical ramifications of a great video game.
Yeah, exactly. I since playing this, I have started reading finally Jason Schreier's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which even prior to
Such a
the
great book.
the
Such a great book.
article a couple months before Last of Us 2 came out that really highlighted and talked about the crunch culture of Naughty Dog. The Uncharted 4 chapter of Blood, Sweat, and Pixels really gets into it again. So it's really weird, especially like the first couple chapters that I've read, reading um, reading some of these chapters from Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, knowing where where the industry has gone in the time since. Like one of the I want to say the first chapter is Pillars of Eternia, and it's like Obsidian, trying to survive, and so they do a Kickstarter game, and it saves the company basically, and now knowing Obsidian is a Microsoft Xbox studio, it's like that story. There's a cool epilogue to that story, or Uncharted 4, the troubled development of that, and then now leading into Last of Us 2. Like that's another interesting story. But even in that chapter, they really talk about that aspect of the crunch culture there. So it's there's absolutely kind of like an internal conflict, because I absolutely like look at this game and think the amount of detail that they put into a lot of things, not everything, as I will touch on in one of my like minor or like very very nitpicky gripes of the of the game, is like the amount of the attention to detail that they put into the game is impressive. It is the best of the best that Naughty Dog's ever done. Did it need to be that detailed? Maybe not, probably not. But it is, and a lot of people probably put significantly more time than they probably needed to because of that. And so there are elements where performances. We'll dive into kind of how great Laura Bailey, Ashley Johnson, Troy Baker. Yeah, how great all of them are in this game. And so yeah, it's basically like the culmination of everything that Naughty Dog has been doing the last two generations, which is great. But I think also, like, again, my biggest issue is that it could have used a little bit of editing. It could have used somebody basically saying, hey, can we pull this back a little bit? I always beat this drum or whatever, but it is a incredible 25-hour experience. I think my original playthrough, because I recorded because I was, contemplating doing a video review or something, I recorded all of my gameplay. And so I have like 26 and a half hours of gameplay of my first playthrough of the game. So it's like an incredible 26 and a half hour experience that could have been a phenomenal 20-hour experience, in my mind, is kind of what I look at for this game. I think that's kind of where I am ultimately netting out on it. But yeah,
Do you think that might be the impact of not having Bruce Straley this time?
I mean, it's certainly possible. Bruce is, especially as is detailed in the in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Bruce, like, Neil is very much the like narrator, the storytelling side of that partnership, whereas Bruce was very much like the gameplay side. And yeah, with Bruce basically going on a sabbatical when this game got announced, and then that sabbatical leading into him leaving the company because he was burnt out from going from Last of Us Part 1 straight into Uncharted 4. I absolutely feel like the loss of Bruce in this, in that Neil didn't have somebody to rein in his, grandiose ideas, maybe. And so yeah, I think that's absolutely a factor, that balance, shifted into this game. So yeah, that's absolutely a great salient point.
Yeah, because I sometimes I imagine it's like, okay, Neil is the storyteller. Was Bruce like his editor? Was Bruce basically like, hey, you've written this story beat, but it doesn't make sense because of this or that?
Yeah.
Like, would that have happened? Would those conversations have happened, and would we have gotten a better game because of it? And yeah, that's an impossible factor to really figure out.
Yeah, again, in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, they talk about how they, especially on Uncharted 4, were equal kind of like partners in the top decisions being made on that game after all the Amy stuff. And, so they had to basically be in alignment for it. And if they did differ, they talk about they would go and sit in a room for 8 hours and kind of like hash out each other's points until somebody kind of folded and somebody gave. And so yeah, without that dynamic happening, you do have probably Neil getting his say more than not, because who's really challenging him at the end of the day on this one? Probably like Evan Wells or whoever the heads at Naughty Dog may have weighed in on some stuff, but yeah, it definitely feels much more like one person's vision than kind of that balance that I think the last couple of games they had provided. So absolutely great point. With that, I think let's dive into some of the spoiler stuff. So from here on out, spoilers of this game are fair game. So if you have not played it yet, feel free to bounce away and then hop back in here. I will have time codes in the episode. If you haven't played it, shout out to you for holding out the last couple months, as the rest of the world like gobbled this game up as quickly as they could.
Well, they've clearly been spoiled already. There's. I
mean, very easily and very potentially, yeah. It's one of those things. Like, I occasionally would check in with Logan, and Logan, I think, hasn't been spoiled on the game so much as like he knows a couple like elements of the game that aren't like, again, in like the grand context of things, probably aren't spoilery. But if you wanted like the quote unquote pure experience of experiencing the story, they are surprises in the story. It's like the fact that we are about to dive into like kind of the two, what I consider the two big spoilery moments of the game, and both those happen before the game's halfway point. So like it's not like knowing either of those things ruins the game or anything like that. So it's a tough game to talk about because so much of the game has been hidden from like the marketing and stuff, and so not like trying to avoid giving that stuff away, to respect that and to let that be surprise to everybody. It certainly and like even this comparison might be minor spoilery, so apologies for that. Again, like last chance, duck away, but like it makes me appreciate Metal Gear Solid 2, which is a game I don't know, but I know like the big twist of that game. It makes me appreciate how that game had to be marketed that much more, because of how this game. And I even went back when I was writing up the review for this. I went back and was like, that's the biggest like analog I can make. So let me go and look at like some reviews of Metal Gear Solid 2 to see how people talked about that game. And they like even going back 20 years or whatever that was, like they very much tried to hide like the big reveal in that game, which again happens incredibly early on. So it's like, how do you like especially in a game that is so heavily focused on like the story and the characters, how do you talk about it when you can't talk about some of those characters, because they're later game stuff. But anyway, so diving into kind of the full spoilery stuff, the big kind of spoiler like number one that I would say is Joel is almost immediately taken out of the picture. Obviously, this crew of wolves, this one of these one like basically regrouped, rebranded fireflies, are out for blood. They have found their way to Wyoming, where we meet our people. It's 4 years later, and Joel and Tommy are out on patrol, and this crew of former fireflies led by Abby find him, and basically, like as soon as he introduces himself, everybody's like tenor changes, and they just go to town on him. They like shotgun his kneecap off basically, and then kill him like right in the first few hours of the game. So it was one of those things.
That's after he saved Abby.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a whole lot of like stuff in that. But
they also offered
certainly
to like give them food and supplies and stuff. Like they were just nothing but nice to them the entire time.
Like, you guys can stay here, or if you want to go, we can resupply you. It's totally up to you. But we're all great people over in Jackson. And then just all of a sudden it's like, wait, it sounds like you know who we are.
Yeah.
We do.
Sounds like you heard us.
And it's like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, jeez.
And so like narratively, there were a lot of moments in this game where I like, as soon as something got introduced, I was like, oh, that's where they're gonna go with it. So as soon as like Abby and Owen are introduced in the like in their little like the opening sequence is what, like Ellie kind of walking through the town or whatever, and then we cut over to Abby like overlooking the town, right?
She's
like
asleep,
Abby and Owen.
like,
Abby's asleep.
house.
Owen wakes her up or whatever, and they go out and look over the town because they're there. They've clearly been looking for Jackson, and like right there, I'm like, oh, these guys are fireflies here to kill him. Before they're really like introduced as wolves or whatever, I'm like, these guys are the remnants of the Salt Lake crew, and they've been they somehow they know what happened, and they're here to find and kill Joel. So like from that point on, as I said, kind of in the spoiler free stuff, I was excited because that was what I wanted out of this game. I wanted like that element of The Last of Us 1 to be examined, and like you don't get to make a decision like rampaging through a hospital of people, and not have to deal with like fallout of that.
Don't just say call them people. Call the fireflies what they are. Like,
I mean people.
Like
it's like they are people.
They're people, but they're also like a militant terrorist organization.
I mean, like, it's always in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, they were also trying to find the cure for this disease.
Well,
like, yes,
that's a point. That's an important point. We'll get into that in a minute. But
I mean, like, the military, complex in this game isn't great either. Like, the remnants of the government,
The remnants of the government are terrible. The fireflies are terrible. Everybody's terrible. That's the point of this world.
Yeah.
Everyone's just trying to survive, and that means fucking over everybody you come across, apparently.
Yeah. But I maybe this factors into it. Like I'm very much in that camp at the end of Last of Us, where I was like, oh, like I get why Joel did that, but that is incredibly a selfish decision that he made.
Oh yeah.
Instead of like letting the one person help the many kind of thing.
I'll put out there, and I kind of brought this up by calling them terrorists. For me, and I definitely mentioned this to you, Trevor. like I have a very particular reason why I don't think either Joel or the Fireflies were in the right. One is
Mm-hmm.
because Joel clearly is like a deeply, deeply troubled person, and it's interesting to see how he recovers when you're playing as Ellie and you're going through his house, and you see kind of like the way that he recovered and got back to kind of the man that he either used to be or wanted to try to be again,
Mm-hmm.
and to like see how he like you walk through his house and all of a sudden you're seeing like a bunch of things that basically qualify as like therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Like you see all this stuff that like he invested his time in to try to like come back to being part of a civilization and society.
Yeah.
And you see that and you're like, oh, okay. And it's melancholy because at that point Joel's dead.
Yeah. I mean, it's
And
all
you're
the things that like you have the luxury of doing when you're not constantly trying to survive. You're not trying to,
yeah
work on your next score because he'd found that community. Like so much of this game just made me really want like a game that just looks at the 4 years where they were in Jackson.
right
And obviously there's a lot of like, ups and downs internally that happened throughout that time that we'll get into, I'm sure. But yeah, it was just like, oh man, like especially the like the whole birthday flashback. I was like, I just want more of these moments
yeah
with these characters that I enjoy. Like I enjoy spending time with these characters, even if I can realize that they are very flawed characters. Um,
But
but
yeah,
yeah,
so Joel, because at that point, Joel is operating off of his selfish need for replacing Sarah,
yep,
and the fact that he has basically created a surrogate daughter from this like random child that he's across the United States with over the course of a year, and is deeply bonded with her. And it is a loving relationship, but the love from Joel's side is like it's I don't want to say it's tainted, but it's tinged with the like this deep emotional and mental scarring that he suffered as a survivor
It,
and as a hunter, as somebody who used to hunt down people for supplies to survive. Like he has transitioned through many roles as a survivor, and it's gotten him to the point where now he gets to the point where he finds a surrogate daughter and he's not going to let them kill her. But on the flips, and like so, I don't think that, and he's definitely not in the right on that because that's coming from like a deeply flawed and emotional place.
yeah,
And it is him basically saying like, and it's an important thing to note is, and let's ask the question: is the world of The Last of Us, is humanity in the state that they're in The Last of Us, worth saving?
well,
We
and
like in that, and I ask this because I made a note of this. They like, and it feels like there is a very large like point that gets glossed over and not really addressed, which is the Fireflies were people who, and it's slightly addressed. Owen addresses it right away, um, or not right away, but he addresses it in a flashback scene where he says like we didn't do good things either. We assassinated military people,
mm-hmm.
or we blew up checkpoints. Like they definitely killed innocent people, and it gets to the point where there is a line issued by a like we're in spoiler territory, so I'll just say it. It's Abby's dad who says, "If we do this, everything we've ever done is justified." And it shows that and it's an interesting look at Marlene, and it's an interesting look at the Fireflies, that the Fireflies didn't wait for Ellie to wake up to say, "Hey, Ellie, this is the situation. We're asking you to like sacrifice your life to do this."
Yeah,
They didn't get, and then what boils it down to is that there is both Joel and the Fireflies, particularly Marlene, who I swore I'd protect her. I told her mother I'd protect her, and in the course of like a 5-minute discussion, I basically like I'm willing to let this girl die without letting her have the choice.
I mean, it's
Here's
like
the
she is very conflicted by that decision, but
sure,
yeah,
sure,
she
yeah,
ultimately errs on the side of the greater good, and the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few kind of thing. Maybe she was a big Star Trek fan, but yeah,
and that's totally fair. Yeah, but the point that I wanted to make is the Fireflies never gave Ellie the chance to make a choice.
Yeah.
And the game takes, in Last of Us Part 2, takes time to lash out about how Joel didn't let Ellie make a choice, but it never brings up the fact that the Fireflies weren't going to let her make a choice either. And also, there's a lot of logistical issues, like the Fireflies being the kind of organization that they are. Cool, they have the cure to save humanity. Who are they going to give the cure to?
Well,
I mean,
that was kind of
humanity.
Well, but what they.
I mean,
Who,
like,
at
yeah,
some
absolutely.
Point, at some point, are you like? At some point, what do you like? Do you like justify like? The Fireflies are the kind of group that would definitely justify not giving the cure to certain people that they don't like. And that also creates a system and a hierarchy of people who are in the inner Firefly circle that have it, those that do not. Like, there's a larger, like,
I think that's
issue
putting a lot of unsupported, like, your theories behind it that isn't at all supported. Like, because I could easily make the argument, like, no, that, like, they're creating this, they will give it to everybody to rid the world of this cordyceps thing. Yeah, they still aren't going to be happy with, you know, how some people live or whatever, but, like, the shitty people are...
It just makes you immune to the infection.
That's so fine, whatever. The shitty people are... So you're not going to get new clickers and stuff. Like, you can eventually wipe away, you know, that issue of the world. And so, like, the world can team up. I mean, it's like... with the same, like, Independence Day, whatever, like, the world comes together. Okay, but what does the world look like after that point? Because admittedly, I haven't seen the 20-year follow up to Independence Day, but
you're not missing anything.
Exactly. Yeah. But so yeah, I don't want to really go too far down that theoretical rabbit hole. But I do, touching back on your point of, like, it doesn't weigh with the ramifications that the Fireflies didn't give Ellie a choice either. I would say that Ellie, I mean, even at the end of the first game, Ellie was resigned and prepared to die for this.
Yeah, but she's also not in the right place either. She has massive survivor's guilt from Riley's death.
Absolutely, she does. But that, like, she still, especially, and it does get, you know, addressed in this game. Like she says, I was supposed to die on that hospital bed. You know, my death could have meant something. I could have done something to help save the world. And you know, because even that is assuming that, you know, they actually could have done, and that things would have gone right, and they could have, you know, found the vaccine or created the vaccine and then created it in mass or whatever. Like, all of that is making, like, leaps of logic that we're taking people on their word, that obviously can never actually get explored because we don't, you know, see the alternate side of the game. Yeah.
And it's entirely possible they didn't have the technology or the equipment to do it. But, like, well, we don't know until we take it out. You couldn't biopsy it? Like, it's entirely possible they don't have the technology to biopsy, and that's totally fine and believable, but, like...
I mean, the thing was, like, embedded in her brain, so it was...
Yeah,
so
but a biopsy is literally just, like, not even taking the part that's embedded into her brain, but just, like, taking... Like, there's a lot of things, like stuff as, like, a, like, pseudo-medical show junkie. I look at it and I'm like, well, what about this or what about that you see on television that may not work, or at the end of the day doesn't serve the story?
Yeah, exactly.
So they're gonna like, bypass it just because it doesn't serve the story.
Yeah, I mean the most interesting, like, we saw the most interesting way that for that story to play out, really. Because yeah, any other thing is like a more boring ending, almost to like for the characters that we followed in that journey. But so into this, obviously those decisions haunt them, and Joel is killed very early on, and Abby basically gets her revenge. And we find out throughout the game, like, specifically what, because, like, I was already, like, in on that they were clearly Fireflies. Mm-hmm. The fact that the second, you know, big twist of the game happens, and, you know, we reach this, you know, not quite halfway point into the game, but we reach a point where Abby has been our primary antagonist, and we've gone to Seattle, and we're there to kill Abby, and we're, like, plowing through all of the other people that were there in Jackson with Abby, and then the game switches us to Abby, which I know, Cam, you have many, many thoughts on, but even that was another one where, like, I was immediately, like, because the you know, you get that very tense scene with Abby and Ellie facing off. Jesse has just been shot very nonchalantly, which is, like, it's one of my favorite deaths because it is so like fast and nonchalant. Because that's one of the types of deaths that I realized, halfway through the Ellie section of this game. I was like, somebody's gonna die like that, because we haven't seen that kind of death in The Last of Us. This very quick, abrupt, I expected it to happen just like a Scar was going to shoot one of us in a cutscene and they were going to die because
it's unceremonious is what you're
exactly.
You're trying
Yes,
to say.
thank you.
There's no pomp, there's no circumstance, there's no
just he busts through a door and boom, gets shot right in the face and he's gone.
Yep.
And I feel like it was also framed really well, because we've kind of talked about this before, but there's kind of that moment because he's laying on the floor and she yells Jesse, and I was like, oh, he's just like wounded and he's gonna like crawl or something, and then it cuts to his face and you're like, nope, he is gone.
Yep. But so you get that very tense scene and then like it cuts. And we go 4 years earlier, and now we're playing as Abby in this very overgrown area. And I was immediately like, we're in the zoo in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
And her dad is the guy. So immediately there, I was like, oh shit, we're in Salt Lake City. We're in the zoo in Salt Lake City, in the overgrown stuff. Then I went and looked in her pack, and she has like 2 items that you can read in her bag. One is like a drawing that Owen has made of her, because they're clearly in the the early stages of their romance. And then the other is like a letter from Mel, like thanking Abby for what a great like support her dad is. And I was like, shit, her dad is the surgeon. And obviously that gets addressed and played out in that scene, but like I was immediately on board for that, and I was absolutely incredibly conflicted, because I'm like this whole journey has been to get to Abby, but now that I'm like, okay, now I'm getting more of the justification for why Abby has made the decisions that she made. Like, I was already bought in on the Fireflies wanting vengeance against Joel.
Yeah.
The fact that it adds that extra like very personal layer to it, like I was like, okay, I like, especially when you jump back to the present and it's like day 1 Seattle, and that is the point where I was like, oh god, I have to do this. I have to do the whole like we're gonna go through 3 days in Seattle again now from Abby's perspective. Man, this is going to be a long game. Like that was absolutely mixed with excitement at, okay, I want to see what they do with Abby. I want to see what they do, because clearly they're gonna they kick it off with that flashback to try and make humanize her, and then immediately at day 1 of Seattle, you're going in there, you're going through the stadium, you're seeing like all the wolves like behaving as a community, just like you saw the people in Jackson behaving as a community. I mean, yeah, they are. Like, they're not. Like, they're not all out on patrols and stuff. They're like, there are a lot of people there that are just kind of like living and surviving and stuff.
That's okay. Yes.
Well, yeah, because I'm with Trevor on that, because like I not only did I love that moment, but it's like, yeah, you go to the cafeteria and you can just talk to people and they're like, oh, well, I got reassigned to go here, and then they also like they yell at Manny for like cutting in line. Like, I feel like it is just this super like normal kind of human interactions. And then let alone the fact that, yeah, then you get to kind of see where all that goes. And I really like how it all kind of crosses, in between what you already know, or like somebody's like, oh, we got to go take everything out of the hospital, so we're going to go do that. Yeah. And then that's where you kind of meet them with like Ellie's part of the story. Like, I thought that was really cool and like humanizing, like you said.
So yeah, the fact that you play half this game as Abby obviously is the other, big twist of the game. And I was a mixture of dreading it because of how long and how exhausting, how emotionally draining the first chunk of the game had been already, that I was like, I don't know if I have it in me for seeing things from Abby's side of things, and also like, okay, I'm curious how they're going to try and win me over to make me sympathize with Abby, as well as just the like.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh man, this is going to be a long one. Yeah,
Trevor.
Yeah.
You know how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get to a point where you liked Abby as a character and you thought that, like, we'll get further into it, but did you feel like she reached and qualified for, like, I guess, redemption?
I think, I mean, at the end of the day, yes. So I think what is really great about what the dueling like narratives does it's showing us Ellie and Abby as, again, I think there's a lot of very intentional stuff here. The fact that Abby collects coins helps set up the idea that Ellie and Abby are two sides of the same coin. Ellie is the Ellie is where Abby was 4 years ago, because Ellie's surrogate father character has just been murdered at the hands of a seemingly villain. Abby didn't know the 20 years that led up to Joel making those decisions, all that stuff. So through Ellie's eyes, we see Ellie's quest for vengeance. Through Abby's eyes, we see that quest for vengeance has been completed now. We see the journey there through her flashbacks, but her quest for vengeance has been completed, and it hasn't solved anything. It still has left her empty, wanting, and so her arc specifically with Yara and Lev helps her find that thing that she's looking for, that isn't hate fueled, that isn't vengeance. It is, finding a family. And so I think
Interesting.
I think especially by the end of the confrontation where she walks away, after shooting, after Dina gets shot with the arrow or whatever, she walks away, doesn't kill the pregnant person, basically, in that moment I know Ellie didn't know she was pregnant, all that, whatever, but there are clearly a ton of parallels between these two characters, and so the fact that she has moved on at her journey, back to your earlier question of does humanity deserve to be redeemed, I think there's always the potential for redemption there. So yes, I think humanity does deserve the cure, even though they're we're clearly seeing the worst that humanity has to offer, but there are still some really great moments even within those worst people. Again, the birthday sequence that we'll maybe touch on is certainly my favorite sequence of the game, and it's absolutely this beautiful thing that this potentially horrendous monster has done, kind of thing. So there's always going to be that dichotomy of humanity, and in a world where survival is the primary goal, that's going to bring out aspects of humanity that a world where survival isn't the primary goal, some of the other characteristics of humanity would rise back to the surface. I think we see that in some of the Jackson stuff, and we see that maybe even in some of the arena stuff there, where a lot of people there are doing a lot of good. They've created this little farm. They've got cattle herding on the 50-yard line or whatever. They're finding a way to make it work and deal with their circumstances. So if they didn't even have to deal with those circumstances again, I think humanity could bounce back even more. And so
now
I think.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You and Frank touched on it, and I balked a little bit because you mentioned their community, Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and this is something that I found interesting, that and this is something that I found very difficult about Abby's playthrough, is the game tries to add the sense of empathy, but your enemies, the wolves, the WLF, are militant fascists who are just as bad, if not way worse, than the government forces that were there before. And the only other alternative in Seattle are puritanical zealots that are a step away from burning people for witchcraft. The game never, and in it, so for me that's it's oh yeah, they have a community. It's that's run where they make mention of who gets what resources, how that's allocated, but the reality is that the WLF, we played through, we know what the WLF did, and in the beginning of Abby's playthrough, they bring up what broke the truce, and what broke the truce is some Scar kids who were out on a resource gathering patrol killed a WLF soldier, and so the kids were taken into custody and then executed.
Mm-hmm.
And Abby doesn't balk an eye or say anything about that, and even later is basically called Isaac's top Scar killer.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's that to me was just this is, and it's interesting. You're oh, it humanizes. yes, it humanizes it humanizes death squads of
Uh, uh,
roving WLF fascists who subjugated and tormented communities until they joined them in the arena where Isaac and his cronies could have them completely under their thumb.
I mean, I like again. I don't excuse like the atrocities that all of these groups commit against themselves or against each other.
But
Um,
you can talk to the other fascists in the cafeteria. That's so cool.
I mean, like they like
I'm
everybody's at war. Everybody's trying to survive, and hey, at least those fascists have Vitas.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
I
uh,
I
yeah,
laughed because not only was there Vita girl who was like kind of
yeah.
notorious, like there is a different guy playing a Vita
Yeah,
in the cafeteria.
the guy that Ellie scars, and basically the first one that she kills there in Seattle. You see him playing with the Vita, and I didn't catch that like until the second playthrough, going back and having those conversations.
I
Because
noticed it.
he's playing a different. He's not playing Hotline Miami. I don't remember which game
Yeah,
he's playing, but it wasn't Hotline Miami. I think
well,
it may have been like Crash or something, or Jack.
that exactly because like I saw him the first time and he was like I walked right up to him and I'm like, oh, this guy has a Vita, and I'm like, what is he playing? Like I'm just like I spent like multiple minutes just trying to get a good angle, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he was playing the lava section of Jack and Dexter, and I was like, this man has good tastes.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so to that, like, there absolutely are like none of the factions are great, but put yourself in any of those factions. Like the people in charge are doing what they can to help you survive, and at least they're helping you survive. So like everybody's going to be a little bit selfish in that regard, and even that faction, if you're reading the early literature or whatever that you find in the kind of open area of Seattle on day one, like that faction was born out of Fedra basically hoarding the supplies and stuff, and so they were like a revolution that happened. And you even see, and I didn't, again, this is something I didn't catch until playing through a second time, but like you see young Isaac in wanted posters and stuff, because that was obviously all happening 20 years early or something. um, and so the idea that like there's an interesting history that I think certainly could still be explored between like you know between some of the backstory between the founder of the Wolves versus or the not the founders of the Wolves, the founders of the Scars, Seraphites, versus kind of those how did both of those groups kind of spawn out of Fedra run Seattle, is certainly not completely explored, and I'm sure there's a lot more in like the story Bible of the Last of Us universe. I'm sure there's a lot more that they've already kind of like thought about with regards to all that. But yeah, I mean it like as we see on a daily basis here in the States, the States are a very individualistic society, so everybody's kind of looking out for themselves, number one. And so if looking out for yourself means aligning or you luck into being aligned, because obviously like by the time Ellie shows up, the Wolves aren't taking on new recruits, they're just shooting people on sight. So so like the fact that Abby and her crew got there and were brought in as like former Fireflies, and I think there's like mention made that Isaac was like a friend of her dad's or something, like, or Marlene or something. Like there's like the Wolves were clearly a different like Fireflies, but with a different name, as is absolutely explored in the game, very
Oh,
explicitly. By
that's an interesting point you make.
I mean, like it even like all of them really are of like the Wolves, the Fireflies, and the Scars. They all kind of have that same like look for the light mentality or whatever. Maybe the
Yeah.
Wolves less so, but yeah, like the Wolves to me seem like the same kind of like anti-Fedra group that we saw the Fireflies behaving as.
So could you imagine if the Fireflies had the cure?
Mhm.
They would end up like an organization just like the WLF.
I mean, I imagine if the Fireflies had gotten the cure, if we want to really head down that rabbit hole, I imagine they absolutely would have basically tried to, maybe not maliciously, but they would have. Yeah, I wouldn't even say they would have maliciously done it, but because they had the cure, I think the people in Fedra, like run areas would have basically overthrown Fedra and supported Fireflies leading, the rebirth and resurrection of humanity, because they end up being the saviors by default. So I think Fireflies, like the Firefly kind of organization and whatnot, would have taken over as the new government entity, and maybe that would have buckled under its weight as well, because they clearly weren't designed for that kind of responsibility. But again, so much of that heads down a rabbit hole. Like there's a million if thens that you could explore in that way. But that's how I just like theoretically would envision it, is that whoever finds the cure is going to hold all the cards. And even if they're willing to, give those cards away for free, the grateful nation is going to say, well, the Fireflies are the ones who saved us, so we absolutely want to align with them instead of Phaedra.
The grateful nation, that's an interesting thought, because I don't think that there's much left of a grateful nation. I mean,
it would have been rebuilt. It's also weird, like, playing this game, like, after Death Stranding or something like that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, that's true. I will say, I think it's interesting to point out that I brought that up because you mentioned it. I was like, yeah, the WLF is, like, they did kind of spawn out of that same kind of, like, mentality, anti-Fedra, kind of launching point. And it's like, okay, so are the Firefly, like, are the WLF what the Fireflies wanted to try to be but couldn't because they got pushed out of Fedra-controlled areas? Were they trying to establish places like the WLF? And at that point, and this is the thing, I love you, Trevor, because you're like, yeah, the Fireflies totally would have, like, been doing, I'm like, the Fireflies, I don't know, because I look at the WLF and I see very interestingly, there's interesting parallels to other populist uprisings.
I mean, yeah, I think they all identify themselves as freedom fighters. And if you're in the freedom fighter group there, you're not seeing yourself as a terrorist. Like Taliban members don't think of themselves as terrorists in the way that we identify them as or whatever. So,
that's not.
But I would say, like, wolves are Fireflies
comparison.
that won. Absolutely, I know. I'm going immediately to extremes. Absolutely, that's fair.
No, the reason I say that is because the Taliban believes that they're in a religious jihad, so they don't see themselves as, like, fighting for freedom. I guess a better comparison would be like the IRA.
I mean, I would argue that the wolves are fighting a war against the Seraphites. So like they're.
Oh, no, the Seraphites for sure. You could definitely, like, the Seraphites clearly have a crusade / jihad like mentality to how they're approaching it. I would say that, but to call the WLF or like, I'd say a better comparison for the WLF would be like the populist uprising that led to the Bolshevik uprising in Russia that led to the establishment of the Soviet Union.
I mean,
I would compare it to, like, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, rising up to fight English aggressive occupation of Ireland.
I mean, certainly smarter people than I have already drawn comparisons to the Israeli-Palestine kind of ongoing conflict between the
the Seraphites
the Seraphites and the wolves, especially given Neil Druckmann's kind of Israeli background. I think
that's a good comparison. Yeah.
And like him having grown up in that kind of, like, region of the world, dealing with that stuff, I think it's absolutely something that was on the forefront of his mind as he's drawing these comparisons. But I can't speak to it well enough myself because I just don't know enough of that conflict personally. But I mean, at the core, wolves are Fireflies who won their fight against Fedra. Like, they succeeded in taking over their area, and have been doing what they can with it for however long it's been since that conflict ended. But then also they're clearly dealing with this ongoing, fight against the Seraphites. And yeah, there has been a truce that was a very shaky truce because, again, if everybody's fighting over what they perceive as limited resources, that's going to like any truce there is going to be shaky. And so Isaac is clearly looking to end the war at all costs or whatever. Seraphites are trying to just live in their little like part of the world, but that conflict is clearly still ongoing, and it's just a new Fedra versus Fireflies kind of fight for us to then get like thrown in the middle of, as either Ellie or Abby.
I thought
But
that
yeah.
part was really I thought that part was really, really cool, and especially going to the fact that not only are you kind of just when you get to Seattle, or you kind of like you said, you're kind of thrown into this middle of a war between two factions like you weren't even aware of before, and you kind of get to like learn about them and kind of figure out what's going on. But when you kind of find out that there was a truce there, and then how the truce was broken and how they kind of ended up back at war, like I thought that was really fascinating, especially because like I thought like one of the overall themes was kind of like violence begets violence. So I thought that was like another like parallel of that it's like it's not even just Abby and Ellie. It's just, when somebody commits a violent act, that's going to get retribution, and then it just never stops.
Yep.
I think it's important to also note, though, that, and I brought it up because Abby didn't flinch one bit over it. Like, I think it was who was it in the truck that was just like, that was just, yeah, about like those poor like said something about them being kids, and Abby like lashes out at them immediately and said, they're scars, like whether they're kids or not.
It would have been Manny or Mel, I guess.
Yeah, it's Manny or Mel. I'm not sure which one it was. I think it might have actually been Manny, who was just like, they were kids.
I mean, even to that, yeah, like Abby absolutely hasn't made the turn yet. Abby doesn't make the turn until Lev and Yara like save her life, basically, and then it's the realization that, I mean, to draw another very broad comparison, it's that idea that people are homophobic until they meet or know somebody in their life that is gay, and they they can empathize with that person, or they have once they get that personal connection, their perspective starts to change. So once Abby gets a personal connection to the scars in the weirdest of circumstances, I think that's when her perception starts to change. And because obviously she is still like antagonistic toward them, and doesn't trust them and all that stuff, but she ends up going back for them, in part fueled by a nightmare or whatever, and part fueled by Owen's own kind of journey through this, where he's given up the fight. I think Abby's like life was so consumed by the vengeance toward Joel that once that happens, there's absolutely a hole that is like in need of filling, and like finding Yara and Lev ends up giving her a new fight to like go on with, because she doesn't like she sees that like, yeah, the violence didn't end things with Joel, especially as her 3 days continues, and actually I mean she doesn't even realize like what's going on Ellie's side of the world really until the end of those 3 days. So like she just knows that like violence is just continuing to beget violence, and she's realizing that, I think, in her own like interactions with the war, as she tries to go and find Owen and all that stuff.
That was exactly kind of like my take or my point there too, is because I think she, like, after the whole Joel thing, I think she just realizes like she doesn't feel like fulfilled or like she accomplished anything. Like it's just kind of like almost like meaningless. Like she's like, I quested after this thing for so long, and it didn't change anything, it didn't fix anything, and maybe she does feel like a little bit better, but then it's like I think that's when you kind of go back to the parallel of like the wolves versus the scars, and she's like this fighting is like meaningless. Like she's like, even if we beat them or like we just keep killing them, like it's like, what is this all gonna mean? Like this isn't gonna get us anything. And I think like, yeah, and then when she kind of makes that personal connection with them, I thought it was kind of like a cool moment when she's just like, yeah, kind of like with Owen, she's just like, yeah, none of this means anything, and even like Owen says too, he's like, this isn't our fight. Like he's like, this isn't like what our fight is. So that's why he's just fully on board to just get out of there and go to Santa Barbara. Like I thought that was a lot of like cool moments and just building off of everything that had like already happened in the game.
Yeah. Cam?
So first thing, that you made an interesting note. People are homophobic until they meet somebody and have an emotional connection with them.
I mean, not always.
At the beginning,
but...
at the beginning of the game, we literally deal with a semi unrepentant homophobe in Jackson.
Yeah, that's very absolutely.
And so and he has an emotional connection to his his fellow community members, but it doesn't stop him from being like, you lesbians out here
but like
kissing.
but he doesn't have a daughter who's a lesbian, basically. So he is that kind of, he is absolutely that archetype of like the person that, you know, hasn't found that personal connection, or hasn't been shamed enough into like realizing that he should be an empathetic person. And so yeah, he is like Seth, and I don't remember what it is, because that guy is Seth, right?
Yes.
I think one of the letters you find out as Abby, or when you're on patrol as Ellie, is Seth like coming into Jackson with like his family or something like that. So I there's almost an extra little like layer of him added after the fact. Assuming it's the same guy. I'm pretty sure it was. But yeah, it like he ends up being such like a throwaway character or whatever that I don't think about him too much in this game. But like even that is, you know, setting up that that notion of like the other or something like that. And obviously
Right.
like we in the beginning it's only like alluded to what happens. We don't see his actual comments until, you know, much later in the game. But yeah, I mean like and I don't absolutely I definitely don't think that is like a one-to-one comparison, but that's like the one of the first ones that I think of when I think of, you know, why people weren't identifying or weren't why that war exists is because people aren't willing to see the other side of things, or aren't willing to see things from the Seraphite perspective, and the Seraphites aren't willing to see things from the Wolves' perspective. Like it's that everybody's so locked into their own mindset that they're not having empathy for one another, until, you know, a couple of stray Seraphites are on the run because they're now outcasts of their own people, and they, for whatever reason, decide to save Abby. And so Abby now immediately breaks and says, okay, not all Seraphites are bad. What does that mean with everything that I've been doing for the last few years? Yeah, I mean, she, like, even when Lev asks her at some point, like, how many of you killed, she just kind of is, like, silent, because, you know, she's, like, weighing her mind with too many, basically, is you know, these were all people that I killed, and what the fuck was I doing? What the fuck was I thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting that you have that perspective on Abby, because for me, Abby is, and let's just leap into like.
I mean, I will say, like, I always want to look for the best in people. So like I'm putting that lens on Abby, but I also know that she is a horrendous person. All of these people are. Like, all of these people are gray with a lot more black than white, I would say, because of the circumstances they exist in. Like, none of these people are great people, but I think they all have potential for good and great things in them.
All right, well, let's go ahead. Let's just leap into talking. I guess we're talking plot points. We're just in full spoiler mode, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go ahead and make some points here, and then feel free to rebut them afterwards. But if I could just like get through my list, because this is coming straight from my list.
Well, real quick, I want to so on like the last little thing on that like big twist that I just wanted you to maybe speak of.
Oh yeah.
Is so like because when that twist happened and suddenly you're now expected to play as Abby, you walked away from the game for a few days.
Oh, for like 3 days. Yeah, I didn't touch.
Yeah,
the game.
because you were like so against that idea as like a story beat, that it resonated with you that much. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I will say this. It's because immediately my mind started, as somebody who like takes like for fun, breaks down, analyzes, and sometimes writes like, you know, papers on like story and plot and these things, and somebody who's like studied storytelling for so long. Like, immediately I started seeing the pieces put together of what Abby's story was going to end up being.
Mm-hmm.
And like once that happened, once I played through like her Seattle, like her, or not Seattle, her Salt Lake scene when she's like, you know, a teenager.
Yeah.
Immediately I knew where they were going with her, what they were going and what they were going to be trying to do. And I think that it's possibly to my disservice for the game, because because I knew what because I knew the tropes and the tricks that they were going to be trying to do to make me feel empathy for Abby.
Mm-hmm.
It oftentimes felt because sometimes Abby is what she said and what she did betrays kind of the points of empathy they're trying to build for her, which is fine. That's a way of telling her story and how she and it tells a story of how she struggles emotionally and with empathy, which is fair. A lot of people do, especially in this world. But
Mm-hmm.
um, like you mentioned, when she doesn't answer Lev for how many people she's killed, it's not. It's to me, it's not too many. It's like I've definitely lost track. Like I've definitely lost count.
Oh,
Like there,
I
like
mean,
it's
yeah,
numerous. It's
yeah,
less of a like, oh, I've killed too many. It's more of a I couldn't even begin to tell you.
yeah.
And so but on my end here of how I felt about it was, I saw the writing on the wall, and I was like, listen, if they go down this route, they're going to go down this route. That's the way the story is going to go. And I will probably I will try to play through it and just go through it and like find the enjoyment where I can out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I walked away and didn't touch the game for 3 days.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's and they like, I mean, I had a similar reaction, but I didn't walk away. I was just like, okay, I might have like that might have been like the end of my playthrough for like that night, but then I came back, the next time I was gonna sit down and play or whatever. Anyway, but I mean, I absolutely like sympathize with that. Like, okay, now I know that we're gonna see the next 3 days from Abby's perspective, and they're gonna try and humanize us, and they don't like shy away from that fact at all. Like one of the first things you see is them like playing with the dogs and making the dogs all cute, and you can play fetch and stuff. It's like, no, these fucking dogs were the bane of my existence as Ellie, so I'm still absolutely right to have been pissed off about
Did
them.
you throw that ball over the fence?
I didn't the first time, but in my second playthrough I did, just to see like what happened.
I
And yeah,
100% did. I lobbed
yeah,
that thing over the fence, and the dog was like, "Arr!" I was like,
yeah.
oh, screw you,
and
dog.
and and Abby's like,
Do you
sorry,
remember?
Alice.
Do you remember when we were at Chipotle and I was like, so yeah, killing the dogs. I don't know like if I can do that. I'll probably try to avoid that. Nah. First dog that came at me, like immediately like did the thing where it bit and like threw me to the ground. I was like, nope, this is down. I'm done with this thing. It's
Yeah.
over. Like this dog is dead. Everybody's dead. And that's another thing I wanted to point out is that oh sorry, we'll get into this later. But yeah, no. So like for me, I needed that time to like mentally prepare myself for the kind of story I knew they were probably going to try to tell me. And I'm
Hmm.
glad that I did because I think my reaction to the end of this game would have been much more vitriolic had I just like gone right into it and played it. Because I took
Yeah.
time to kind of like prepare myself for the story I felt was coming, and when that story did end up coming through much more closely than I was expecting actually. Like I was
Hmm.
like I didn't make like predictions and like on the story beats, but like for me to end up walking away from this game and being like, "Huh, I called that much of it."
Yeah.
Is a little shocking to me. But
And
I
that's,
will
yeah,
yeah.
like you and I have texted back and forth about that a little bit of like, yeah, I mean, like very very like top level narrative things. This tells a very familiar kind of story structure if you've consumed a lot of media, or if you've studied a lot of media. Like as somebody who like went to school for theater and stuff and studied story structure and narratives and all that stuff, yeah, like again, I was able to be ahead of the game on a lot of their more like micro level beats. But then again, as soon as we got to like, okay, we're playing as Abby, so now I know we're going to lead up to like the confrontation between those two characters. I didn't see that. I didn't necessarily figure out how that confrontation was going to end. And then I certainly didn't see like the going off to Santa Barbara kind of chapter of the game or whatever. But real quick before we dive into your kind of laundry list of grievances or items there, Cam, what did you think, Frank, on the shift to Abby? Because I don't think we really got your perspective on that whole thing.
Yeah, I thought it was definitely interesting, and I think your Metal Gear Solid 2 comparison was like a really great comparison there, because like even early in the game when you kind of like pick up as her, I was kind of like with you where I immediately was like, oh, when he literally when he's like, hey, I have to show you something, I found something, I was like, oh shit, they found Jackson. And then
Yep.
I honestly too, like I was thought, is the whole game just going to be you playing them like hunting, like are they going to do that flip where like the entire game is you just like hunting after like Joel and Ellie. And then so I thought it was interesting when you kind of flip back to Ellie and then you flip back to Abby again, and they kind of do that kind of like flip flop for like half the game. And
Yeah.
uh like I thought it was definitely interesting, and I really liked a lot of the time spent as Abby, because like I thought it did do a pretty good job of like humanizing all the people that you kind of have already either, you know, murdered or have like run across, and some of the people who have been killed in like brutal ways. But like I thought that was really interesting because like I think that was something you don't get in a lot of like games, let alone media in general, is like trying to like humanize or explain like where the other point is coming from. And I'm not
Yeah.
even saying like they're, or like the things they did was okay or good, or they're even like good people, but I definitely think it's interesting where you're like, well, I can completely understand their side and like why they're doing all of this, just as well as you can kind of understand Ellie's side and like why she is coming after them in the first place.
Yeah, we
um
didn't like in Uncharted 4. We never played as Rafe to understand, why his jealousy of Nathan has become so strong or something like that. It is that if you had played through this entire game as Ellie, you would have only seen the wolves as one-dimensional bad guys. And the fact that I mean, like one of the things I had written up in my review was even the element of the game that is the scars or the wolves have names assigned to them, so that when somebody dies and another like NPC finds them, they scream out like Joseph, no, or something like that. Like even that adds like an extra element of humanity and empathy
Really?
towards them. In that, I mean, like, yes,
I'm
there's
with you, Trevor,
humanity.
on
These
that.
people, are friends that they're out on patrol. They're soldiers together. So like the fact that like one of your friends died, you're gonna feel for that, and you feel for like the factions in this game are leaps and bounds above the hunters of the last game
Oh,
for
without a
me.
doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
And
Well,
and an element of that is that they
yeah. I mean,
have
Dave. I wouldn't
like
classify David's group as hunters, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, but the fact that they have names, and you can like the implication that they have then like past lives and relationships, and interpersonal relationships and dynamics to them makes it like obviously for the sake of the game you're still going to like plow through and kill them because they're going to shoot you if you don't, but it still adds like this extra layer of grayness to these characters that otherwise could very easily be drawn as black and white. And so if we hadn't played through as Abby, like the the interpersonal relationships of Abby's group wouldn't ever be explored, so you wouldn't know, how pissed off the guy would be that the girl at the meteorology place or the TV station or whatever is dead, like because they had like a relationship going or a fling or something like that. Like there's enough details there that are explored from Abby's group that help. Again, like I say humanize. I don't think it makes them a good person or not, but it adds extra dimensionality to their characters that makes them more interesting and more compelling characters, and makes me as the player examine like, hey, is what I'm doing good? No, it's not. It's because I'm going in and killing people, just as recklessly and just as needlessly as they came and killed Joel, and it does, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind is kind of like the mentality that ends up getting evoked much more compared to an Uncharted story where you are just like flaunting around how many people you're killing basically,
That's it. That's
because
interesting.
they're all
Yeah.
like just nameless grunts with guns or whatever.
I will say I actually had a complete different response to that.
Okay.
Um, them having names didn't for me trying to evoke, and it's the same thing with the dogs like whimpering when you kill one of the people. I used to like shoot the the dog handlers just so I could like get the dog out from the bushes and I could kill it easier. Um, like a sniper, like
Well, I
harming
mean,
a
yeah, like
person to drag the others out.
Yeah, for again, for gameplay rationale, I absolutely did those same kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
Or I would always try and take out the dogs first because they were the thing that most prevented me from sneaking around the battlefield and just taking people out.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's still it adds an extra it just adds an extra flavor to the combat encounters that that supports the whole rest of the narrative of hey, nobody's all good or all bad.
For me, it didn't, and this is I'll get into it when I want to talk about Ellie and her journey through this game, but there is I wrote it down here, because there's never any sort of non-violent option. There's never an option to negotiate, or after you kill enough of them, they'll stand down or they'll run away. It's always the game always puts you in a situation where you're going to be killing people, and then they give them they give them names and stuff just to artificially make you feel bad about it.
I mean, yeah, I would say there are areas where you can run through, you can't avoid combat altogether. You can just kind of sneak away to the next area. Not everywhere. There are some that are are going to be locked off until you clear a battlefield or something like that. But there are some of those cases where you can kind of do that. And yeah, I mean the whole thing is an artifice, absolutely, in terms of gameplay. But it's an artifice they didn't have to do, but it supports their idea that they want you to not just recklessly, or if you have to recklessly kill, which obviously maybe you do, there is an added weight to that. And sure, it's artificial because they don't have the time to give you everybody's backstory of all these NPCs that you're going to fight and make that still an interesting game. But it's a small thing that they were able to do that I had an appreciation for. But I can totally understand that you having the opposite response.
Because I'm going to use this as a comparison, but I'm only using it. I'm not referencing it because of the organizations, or I'm trying to say the organizations are 1-to-1. But that's if for me, my comparison I would make is that's I'm playing Wolfenstein 2 and I kill a dude sneakily, and then somebody finds the body and goes, "Oh no, they got Lars!" It's just a name. It's not it's not it's a person with anything there for that. It's just and it's generic a name. It's not oh no, there's actually a really interesting moment in when I was playing as Abby and I found I was crossing the bridge. I listened to a conversation between two of the Seraphites, and they mentioned that, and one of them is basically giving counseling to the other one.
Yeah, one of their wives died or something like that.
It was less of no, it's they had lost their child, and so the elders had seen fit to give them another. And they're talking about because apparently their child had died from the scarring ritual, from the whatever, basically didn't recover, got an infection and died. But the for them to have another chance, and for him being nervous about his child going through this another child going through this process again, and giving counsel, and it felt I'm okay, I ended up killing those people because I had to. They spotted me eventually, and I had to take them down. But to me, a moment like that is way more than just the military chatter of the same stuff about Isaac and the same stuff about what's Isaac thinking. All of that with the WLF for me was that, versus the Seraphites a lot of times were basically just spouting religious babble nonsense. But sometimes you got that one moment, I will say, is an excellent moment of making me feel empathy in that situation, because it I could have totally skipped that and missed that entirely just by going in and recklessly killing these people. But because
at one point I did just kind of throw a pipe bomb up and blow them up midway through that thing, because I was I would especially in the second playthrough, it was all right, yeah, and I remember you guys talking about this kind of thing. Just let me take you out so I can draw everybody else out and just kind of run through this little arena.
Yeah. Especially as that arena is actually can get complex with where they're hiding and sniping.
Yeah, because I want to say that one, if we're talking about the same one, that one is on the construction path on the way up to over the bridge kind of thing. And so yeah, it's multi-layered and there's people all over the place. And yeah.
Yeah. shout out to level design on like
I mean, yeah,
the combat arenas.
like again, like it was a mixed bag for me because like it was great being in the middle of it, but then if you finished it on one side, then it took 2 minutes just to get to the other side in the end to progress through to the next area. And I was like, this was a lot of downtime.
Or it took even longer if you're trying to like go through drawers and
Exactly.
cupboards
Yeah.
and shit. And then,
Yeah. And obsessive compulsive Trevor was absolutely going and checking every drawer, even though I was almost always like full of whatever like equipment and stuff I had. So I was never like I was finding stuff, but it was stuff I already had. So I was like, poop.
no, I'm with you there because I was constantly like overloaded, and I was still like looking, especially for like collectibles, or you find like upgrades and stuff sometimes. So I'm like, well, I don't want to miss any of this. And then I'm like, but then there's like kind of going to one of your points earlier. There's like there's entire rooms and sections where there's just nothing. Like you just go in there, and I'm like, oh, I open this drawer. Oh, there's nothing in here. Cool. So like, why am I even in this half of the map? Like,
Yeah, there's entire sections of that map that don't have anything in their drawers.
Yep. Yep. Which I mean, like again, for the sake of world building, cool, great. But for the sake of like the player, it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of stuff I'm doing in here that isn't fun.
I need to read this because I thought it was a little funny. And then they expect you to feel bad about it because violence and revenge are bad. Okay.
Yep.
Anyway.
I mean,
Yeah,
very true.
That's basically
Yep.
what it come down on. So yeah, no, I just when you're like, yeah, let's. I'm like, did not feel that about them.
At the very top level, you can boil any game down to a very like simple dumb thing like that. Like Super Mario, it's about going right and saving a princess. Okay. For me, it's yes, that's like the very
but
top level
they don't
description.
name every
but then
single
it comes,
Goomba and expect you to feel bad for stomping them.
I mean, no, but it would certainly be an interesting. I mean, well, they tried to do that in the movie, basically.
Yeah, they did. How did that go?
Toad or whatever. Yeah, but it's. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea in the execution of that. You're supposed to feel bad for them, okay? Thing. So it's an execution that worked for me. It worked well for me in execution. Clearly, didn't work as well for you in execution.
No, it did not.
it worked well for me too because like I guess that one of my takeaways from it wasn't really like the finger wagging like you should feel bad about this or like you shouldn't be killing these people. It was really just the fact that I thought they were trying to really like hit home that like these are just people trying to survive, and even if they have different ideals or even if they're like worse about some of the things they do, especially like in this war they have with the scars, like I just really thought it was like, yeah, these are humans. And even the random people who you only interact with for 2 seconds before you kill them, it's like that was a person and they had some kind of a story even if you don't know who it was. Like at one point I'll keep this brief, but like there was the part where like multiple wolves are like walking towards me. There's two on the left side of the street and there's one on the right side of the street. Since they weren't really looking at each other, I used my silencer and I shot one of them in the head, and they just kind of like went down into the grass and you couldn't see their body. But the guy on the other side of the street turns, and not because like he heard anything, he just looks over and he sees that that person wasn't there anymore. But instead of going like huh and just walking over there and then discovering a body, he like turns and he goes Zoe, and he's like Zoe, and he runs over and he's like Zoe, like where are you, like what happened. Like so I was like that I get that it's like, yeah, the guy doesn't have like a ton of depth or like this story they're like shoving in your face, but I'm like, I appreciate something like that much more than just like huh,
Yeah, or generic like man down, like it adds like just the hint of realism to these characters, essentially, like these non-character characters, where like yeah, if in any other game they die and somebody finds the body and screams man down, and that's the cue for everybody else to come. But like in a especially in like a not entirely military complex kind of thing like the wolves or the scars, like those are going to be personal relationships. So at least those those people who are, I mean, like going back to the Jackson stuff, Dina and Ellie are on patrol. If Dina was suddenly shot, Ellie's not going to be like, woman down. Obviously, she doesn't have anybody to shout it to or whatever, but she's going to be like, Dina, no! And so, like, it's making them, for the splittest of seconds, like a character in their own story. That is a story we're never going to see or we're never going to experience. But I mean, like they're endlessly at this point now. Jesse's out there. Like all of those people died in a very unceremonious way. but they meant something to somebody theoretically.
I
So
don't know. It's the fact that everybody feels like, oh no, there's not even one person who's just like, oh, they got Clint. Oh, well, I mean, he used to be a rapist, so like, screw that
I mean,
guy.
yeah, like
Like, fuck
that
that
would
guy.
have been that certainly would have been a fun little flavor if they were like, oh, I always hated him anyway, like,
Or like,
and they're
do you
like
remember when
that.
he like when he remember when he kicked the dogs? Like,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
not a good person. Like, we shouldn't really be like, it sucks. We need to like find who killed him, but like, good riddance,
That
man.
that's definitely an extra little wrinkle in things that reminds me of one of my favorite little moments in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is when they're leaving Alchemex and like all the scientists like see like, oh, hey, there's it's Spider-Man, and like all of them pull out their guns. There's like one scientist at the table that just kind of like shrugs and is like, not this shit again. And
Yep.
like so I love that like idea that you are kind of touching on there of like not everybody's going to feel uniformly about all this stuff, but it's it's tougher to like pull that off in execution than maybe
Or just like
one would want.
if he turned around and he went, Zoe, where are you? Where are you? And the other person was like, oh, she gone? Thank God. She's such a bitch. Like, that would have been like that gives realism. The
Yeah.
Everybody reacting the same to everybody dying, and like, where is it? Is the like the I don't know if it's just because I stealth killed most people as Ellie, um, but for me it was always like the where'd this person go? Oh no, they got this person. Oh no, like that became the new what's going on over there for me. So it became like, and it happened so often that I guess I like, maybe I'm desensitized to it, and I became like it just bled into the background at that point. But I don't know, like I did not have that same, and I guess and it's fine that we feel differently about it. That's art, but
just just know, Frank, that if you and I and Cam are ever out on patrol with one another and somebody just like completely murders us, Cam's gonna be like, huh, okay, well, I didn't really like podcasting with him anyway.
no, for me it'll be like, oh shit, they're dead. Cool, I'm out. Like, I'm not dying here.
Yeah, peace. I'm back. Yeah, that's another layer that would have been interesting. Was like it would have been if there was somebody that was like that Iron Man 3 goon that was like, I don't even like these guys. Please don't kill me.
Yeah,
And
that
there,
I
like
would've
there
liked.
were a couple, because there are a couple encounters where like if you get down to like the final person, they'll like and like maybe shoot their knee or something. They'll sit there and not like they're actually going back. There was one encounter I loved in Seattle as Ellie, like fighting in a gas station or something. And it like seems like it was a completely random kind of thing because it didn't happen the next time I played through. But like a guy ran into and hid in the bathroom. Like he saw shit was going down and he went and hid in the bathroom. And if you went into the bathroom to like track him down, he was there. Like he basically sat there begging for his life. He wasn't going to like shoot you and try and kill you or anything. And I, of course, being the genocidal maniac that I was in this game, killed him anyway. But it was like even that was like an interesting little dynamic that I was like, oh, that was an interesting little flavor that just that stood out because it was different. And so yeah, I'm sure if you had some of these other encounters, they absolutely would have been stuff we would remember and think about of like, hey, remember when that guy was like, please don't kill me, I don't even like these guys, I will just like I will run away and never do anything again. Like that would have been something that probably would have jumped out and been like, hey, remember when they did this. So I can appreciate where you're coming from, that yes, they all do feel samey, even if it is different names or whatever. But like even that, I still appreciate that they took it like one step further than just man down, man down.
And I like I definitely wish we could have had more moments like what you were saying there, with like somebody kind of like was just like, hey, I'm not about this, like I just kind of joined up with them because they had supplies, and like and they just kind of like surrender and you're able to just go on. Because like one of the moments that stuck out to me was when you're in the when you're Ellie in Seattle and you're in the apartment, and it's that one,
Yeah.
it's the one where you're like working on guns and they're like, we're not gonna go
Oh yeah.
back, and they like slam you, and like that's a cool moment. But what happened in my game basically is I had like a hatchet or an axe, and the way they were all lined up, I basically just like killed all of them just like instantly. And you get down to the last person, and the last person basically like puts down their gun and is like, okay, cool, like I don't want to do this. And That's the kind of moment though where I'd be like, well, yeah, like I'm not even the person you think I am. Like I'm not with the wolves. Like if this was real life, I'd be like, okay, hey, like you can go, but you can't let that person go. You have to kill that person to move on. Like there's literally no other option. And I just like
Yep.
Hmm.
I that's just one of the moments where I wish there was some of these moments where somebody surrendered or did kind of like what you're talking about, like the Iron Man 3 thing, because I'm like, hey, this isn't my fight, and I'm not even with the people you think I'm with. Like you guys could all lived through this, but you jumped me, and I have no other choice but to kill you all, and otherwise I can't move on. Like,
And I
Yeah.
think I think that's what kind of like a frustration I have with this game is they give you like the best way to put that I'm going to put it is this: they give you like a reaction, or they give you the feeling, or they give you the results of something, and then they treat it as though you had a choice. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
like you don't have a choice in these circumstances. There's not like Ellie does not have a non-lethal. I'm gonna sneak up and like put you to sleep, or I'm gonna like sneak up and tell you drop your gun and like run away or whatever. There's no option to like be not there's no option to be non-violent. The game as a game and how it's designed demands that you are violent, and then it tells you, hey, you're being violent. Isn't that bad? Like, aren't you being like? Isn't it bad that you have to be violent in this case? And it's like it's reinforcing something that I think is already reinforced by other aspects of the game, to the point where it becomes, I don't want to use this word, but like the only word that comes to mind is like tawdry. It becomes so like it's not finger wagging so much as it's like the Buzz Lightyear Woody uh like like Buzz has his hand on Woody's shoulder and like does like the hand wave where it's like it's all this, or look at all this stuff, and it's like look at all this violence you have to do. Like, isn't it bad?
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's bad, but like you're treating it like I had a choice. Like,
It's what is it? I feel like the term is lampshading the term, where it's like, okay, yeah,
yes,
you
that's the
like
word. Yeah,
you call attention to it, but you're still like doing it. Um,
yeah, lampshading is the
it's
right
it
term. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like it's very much that. It's just because you're recognizing it within the like confines of the game doesn't mean it excuses it. It just means you're just as aware of it as we are. But again, like for the sake of a game, it's something that they still need to make interesting and compelling for the player, and that was their approach for it. Um, so yeah, let's go through some of your kind of big
All right,
long list of notes there, Cam. Hit us
all
with
right.
some of your stuff.
Let's talk about Abby. First off, let's make a major point. Mel was right.
Oh, that Abby's an asshole or whatever.
Yeah, Abby, like Mel's like,
Abby
what is
sucks.
this
Yeah.
turnaround for? Like, now all of a sudden you have like these two kids that are Seraph, or they're scars, and all of a sudden you're no longer Isaac's top scar killer. Like, and she basically calls Abby out for killing kids before. Like,
Yep.
you're okay with with children dying, but because like these two like helped you, all of a sudden they're different from all the other ones you've murdered. Like, you're not a good person just because you're doing this. And it's like and she calls her out for basically like dragging people down with her for like through her actions. And like she says, I'm not going to Santa Barbara if you're going. Like, I just like, and honestly, Mel's right. She like 100%. Like,
Yeah, no,
this
I mean, like, well, obviously their whole dynamic is very tainted by like the whole love triangle aspect of it, anyway. But yes, yeah, I mean, Mel is absolutely like the voice of reason, and Abby doesn't disagree.
no,
Like
she has to
Abby
say,
knows,
she has to
Abby
say,
knows that, yeah,
yeah.
she absolutely is a terrible person, but she's like it's like I definitely don't want to draw this comparison like too heavily or anything, but it's the ongoing conversation that we have in kind of like the Twitterverse right now of like, hey, what deserves to be canceled outright, like cancel culture, which is not a thing. It's people having to face the consequences of their actions. But at what point is it well, yeah, I fucked up in the past, but I've tried to learn and grow from that. So don't hold me accountable for all of my actions of the past, especially if like you are trying to change or something like that. At what point does Abby get a second chance? I guess is maybe the thing to be examined here, and maybe she isn't worthy of that second chance in the course of this game or any of that kind of stuff. But
I will say,
I think she's trying to like head down that path and try, like she's trying to be better. Whether she is worthy of us empathizing with that or not is gonna, your mileage may vary. But
I also wanted to put out Laura Bailey is a phenomenal voice actress, actress in
absolutely.
general. Like she totally, knowing what Laura Bailey looks like in real life, the way she's able to convey Abby, who is just like biologically built differently than her, from her like, because even if you're not talking about like her motion capture for her body movements, her facial movements match her body type, and Laura Bailey conveys that so excellently. And this is something I actually love about Abby's as a character design, is Abby is this built out, like just built character who's a girl. We always see the same, like you're always seeing the same kind of female like character model versions out there, and to have and be able to play as somebody who is somebody who has dedicated their time to protein training, weightlifting,
who had a sports arena gym at her beck and call for her quest for revenge. Of course it makes sense that she's got like she builds up the muscles over that like 4-year span that we kind of like see her in different phases in. Of course.
Even when she's 14, she is she has broader shoulders than most other girls, you'd expect other girls her age to, like compared to Ellie.
Well, even there, I mean, she's still a soldier in that, even in that point. Whereas like Ellie had not joined anything. Ellie's backstory is like she was in the preparatory school or whatever, and would have gone.
She was in a military school.
She was in a Fedra military camp or whatever, and so like she just wasn't there. She might have eventually gone that route or whatever, but whereas Abby was raised as presumably in the Fireflies, and so from even a younger age she was probably in some kind of like regular regimen.
Even then though, the other kids were too. But like the point I wanted to make though is it's good to see such like just body diversity.
Yeah.
So it's like just to have a different body type diversity in a game like this, for not just a character but the character you play as, I thought was really cool. And it justifies Abby being this like person who like chokes people out, and and it tells a lot about Abby. She likes to slowly suffocate people out until they can't breathe anymore and they die. Like that's how she stealth kills. Like it's intense.
Yeah,
and it's
I definitely didn't pull that much from it.
I didn't either. I just said it now because I thought it was funny.
Okay. I mean, yeah, like because but no, I mean that is a valid point. It's just not something I thought about at all while playing the game, but it is, yeah. Like if she wanted it done, she could have just quickly snapped somebody's neck and killed them. But the fact that she does, like, it is slower and more drawn out in a longer animation, and oftentimes like an animation that is happening right in front of the camera in front of you.
Also, I noticed she doesn't. She'll snap a cordyceps neck. She won't snap a person's neck though.
Yeah.
So she will snap a cordyceps neck because she recognizes a danger that choking them out really doesn't do anything. You have to break down their resistance and then snap their neck. Versus she just suffocates people with her biceps, which is honestly, as a gameplay aspect, rad as hell. Like that is so cool. That's cool.
Yeah. It's definitely something I didn't like. I remember seeing and I remember especially like in the trailer they showed that kind of showed off the scene of Abby, Yara, and Lev when Abby was hanging. Like I remember when they showed that first trailer and like the brutality of like the hammer to the face and stuff. I was like, this game is going to potentially be more violent than I'm interested in. And I never. It was weird because like, while the game, of course, is very violent, like I never felt like it was. It never even came close to me really for crossing a line in terms of that. Like I was always far enough removed via the camera or whatever from the violence, that even those moments where you're choking somebody out and the camera is like closer, and you quote unquote see the life of coming out of their eyes or whatever, like they were still quick enough that it wasn't as quick as a nap snap, but like they were still choking out way quicker than a person normally would. I mean, consider like all of the people that Abby chokes out to the length of Abby being held under the water at the end of the game, for example, and it's night and day. So like in the gameplay aspect of things, it all still happens quickly enough that I was like in and out. I never I've played enough games that I'm sure I'm like far too desensitized to that kind of violence. But yeah, it absolutely is still like, hey, even if it's just a couple seconds more or something like that, it does, it was clearly a choice. It is saying something about, Abby's idea of how to handle combat versus, Ellie, who just stabs. There's an interesting thing. I remember seeing, I want to say Scott White. I remember seeing him tweet out early on about how he loved not having to deal with shivs anymore. And I always meant to circle back to him after he beat the game and was like, so you clearly hadn't gotten to the Abby section of the game yet. What did you think when shivs came back into the picture?
Let's talk about Abby. You mentioned earlier you felt Abby was the same different side of the same coin as Ellie. I don't think that's the case. I think she is 100% the same, like a different side of the same coin as Joel.
I mean, well, like from those aspects, sure, absolutely. Like Abby,
not just gameplay aspects. I mean, in general, like her, like, because, and I'm gonna break this down here. I mentioned earlier, up at the top of the show, or towards the top of the show, Joel makes the decisions Joel makes because at the end of the day, Joel's looking out for Joel, and he's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's very damaged, but he's very selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Abby is an inherently very selfish character, and one thing I will say is, I think it's a very bold of Naughty Dog to give such a glaring flawed character trait to a character that they want you to also empathize with. I don't think I don't think it lands for me because of that. But like her decisions, the things Abby doesn't do for other people, and that's what when I said Mel was right. Mel points out you do things for yourself. It's about you. You don't do things for other people. So why are you helping these kids? Because you're not doing it for them.
I would argue that Ellie is also like, especially like when Ellie leaves the farm, Ellie is also absolutely acting out of selfishness.
Oh, I will say that. I'll agree with that.
So yeah, I see all of them as selfish characters that are working to fuel their own justifications more than like a greater good or more than helping other people or something like that.
Ellie,
so like I view them all as selfish, I guess.
Ellie I feel a little bit different when she leaves the farm. There's like I felt like that was a much more complicated choice and decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will say that. There is also, so to make it, because I want to circle back to Ellie later, but to kind of like wrap up here is, I mean, she's an inherently selfish character who is so self-centeredly focused on her own pain, needs, and wants that her connection to Yara and Lev, like honestly, her connection to Yara and Lev, it like I ended up like following through on it, especially by the end of the game, but like she's okay killing, and I made this point earlier, she's okay with killing kids before, but all of a sudden like she has to protect Yara and Lev, like there's such a disconnect that ended up, I felt like by the end of the game, like hadn't really been addressed but had been bridged over, so there's no like they weren't going to address that at all. And I don't know, like, and I think you can make the argument that like because she didn't find what she wanted out of her revenge on Joel, that this is filling this hole or whatever, but I just felt like there was such a like, here's the thing, if I had to make the decision to go back and help Yara and Lev, and I made that decision, and even if it was a little bit out of character, I felt like that's a choice I decided for her, so Abby was going to do it because I made that decision, that would be something I recognize. And I guess it's a flip side of the game makes you feel, like the game wants you to feel like, oh, isn't this terrible that you're like all this violence, and then all of a sudden the game's like, well, isn't it wonderful that Abby's like, she's not, you don't like her, but look, she's going to help these kids. Don't you like that? Like, look at her helping these kids. You can fit so many helping these kids in this car.
I mean, like, I think you view it a lot more cynically than I did.
Yes,
because I view it.
This was 3 days after I steeled myself for
Yeah.
it, so yeah.
I certainly viewed it more as like, I mean, initially that response seems to me fueled much by these people saved my life. I can't leave them in the state they were in because like I owe them a debt, basically. Is how I viewed Abby making the decision to go back.
That would mean that Abby, like, and this is part of the disconnection for me. That would mean that Abby has a sense of moral obligation, and at no other point did I feel like she demonstrates that outside of Yara and Lev.
I mean, okay, yeah, I feel like she gets very connected to people. Like, she was very connected to Owen in a lot of the flashbacks that we see with them, and obviously, like, that connection, while like splintered and fractured, clearly never completely went away.
Yeah, but
and
that's
so
also like 5+ years of like friendship and knowing somebody.
Right. But that's, I mean, like, the relationship with Owen is also an element that fuels, the like, the fact that Owen has made the decision to walk away from everything probably also influences Abby to walk away from things. And so when Abby makes that first step to go back and get Yara and Lev, she does that, and that ultimately leads, especially when she's like caught and found out, like, she ends up being an outcast just like Yara and Lev are. And so now she's on her own, they're on their own, and so she has that you're my family moment with Lev in particular.
I will say we get that towards the end, and I'm okay, and that's where I'm like, they've bridged over it. Where we're at,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
When they,
but by the time you get there,
their scene in Santa Barbara, for me, that's what that moment is. It's like, okay, they've bridged over it. I can't be dwelling on this too much. Like, it is what it is. Like, this is where they're at, and I do like the dynamic of Yara and I loved Yara. I love Yet Lev. I love Yara. Like, those two characters for me are like what really kept me going through Abby's story. Was like, I want to help Yara. I want to help Lev. I want to help these kids because, and like when Abby did go back, I'm like, oh cool, I'm going back for these kids because I want to save them. But that's, I want to save them. And I understood that motivation for me. And then like Lev and Yara, and then like when you find out about, they're calling Lev Lily, all this stuff, and then you find out, by the way, I did predict that you would have to like, Lev would have to confront his mother and it wouldn't go well. I didn't expect I expected to walk in to see it happen. I didn't expect to walk in the aftermath.
Yeah.
Which made it feel actually even more devastating in some ways, versus seeing, if you saw it, it would just be like, well, there's more violence. In this case, you just see this child that has inadvertently went back to save their mother, and in doing so actually killed her. And that hit me real hard. Also, Lev's entire story is just, and like her and Yara's like retelling it of how she used to be, like, she was like upset that Lev couldn't just be like everyone else and all this stuff, and it's like, that's a very, like, this is a very real relationship, and I love these two characters so much that when Yara makes her sacrifice because she knows she's going to die anyway, like, I cried when that happened, because I'm like I loved Yara. Like, I did all this so Yara would live after her amputation, and she still, but
it still ends up being for naught. But she gives you a second chance
because she ends up, like, Yara's death at the end of the day is on two people: Isaac for being the one that made that decision in that situation, but also Lev, because Lev made the decision to go back for their mom, and in doing so lost both his sister and his mother.
Yeah.
And that's just a tough break. But it fits with the story of the world, and like, I honestly felt like, like Lev deserves to live. Lev deserves to have this life, And so seeing Santa Barbara as the scene with just Lev and um, Lev and Abby, like trying to find the fireflies in Santa Barbara, I felt like worked for me. And
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing: if that had just been the epilogue for the game, like you have Ellie and like she's building a life, and like this is the aftermath of like what her and Tommy's decision to go to Seattle was, like what they lost and what all of that, and like all of that happens, and then you just get this like thing where it's like, yeah, this is Abby and Lev, you know, they're on their adventure, and that had been like the end of it. There hadn't been that entire last section of the game, which
Mm-hmm.
was just anyway. I
We'll
felt
dive into that
yeah,
too.
we'll dive into that too. But anyway, so moving past that, like for Abby, that's just like where I'm at with it. It's like this is a character that I think is really like this is a character that is performed exceptionally well by Laura Bailey. I think that is a very realistic, very flawed person. But like at the end of the day, I don't like her, and and that's fine. I think that's okay. I think that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like just because I don't like a character doesn't mean it's not a good character. In fact, it actually speaks more to it. If I didn't care about Abby, if I didn't care about like what happened, like how their conflict ended, if I didn't care, then that would be worse. That would be that'd be evidence of it being bad. But it's not bad. It's good.
Yeah. So you didn't like Abby. Did you like Ellie?
Yeah, I love Ellie.
Okay. Why do you love Ellie?
Um. So
I mean, maybe I shouldn't ask that because then we're
you want to get in?
there's
You want to get in
there's
my
another
list?
15 minutes I just added to the podcast.
Yeah, you want me to go through my list on Ellie? We'll go through my list on Ellie. Um. So there's a lot. So Ellie, I love Ellie, but I love Ellie because um, one, I've seen her since Last of Us Part One. Like
I mean, like,
she,
yeah, that's
she
like part of it is
legacy.
our
Yeah.
is our immediate is our is our predilection to favor Ellie over Abby because we've already played a game without Ellie. We've played maybe Left Behind with Ellie. We play the first part of this journey with Ellie, and so like we're predetermined to like Ellie more. But personally, I walk away from this as mad at Ellie at times and stuff. And there were a lot of times where like, especially when Ellie and Abby like would come to blows, where I'm like, I don't want either of you to win this. Like, in the the scene in the theater, when you're having to play as Abby.
Do you know how many times I walked into death just to see Abby die?
I mean, you're a monster, but
No, 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 no,
I
no.
did love in that sequence.
Justified by
Real
that
quick,
cutscene that happens in the theater. Justified.
I mean, fair. I did as a small little like one of my little like favorite things that like really didn't come into play nearly as much as I would have thought it did. I love that in that sequence, like Ellie can set traps and stuff just like she can when you're playing as her, and so like I blew up when I walked into one of her like mines or something at one point, and I loved that like gameplay element of that fight. But in both that fight and the end of the game, I was like, I want you to both like talk this shit out. But I get that is not the world of The Last of Us. That the things that these characters have gone through has not made them the kind of people that are going to sit down and have a heart to heart about this. So like fighting and trying to kill each other is the only way. But I did like that it ends with Ellie, maybe forgiving herself for her role in Joel's death or whatever. Ultimately, yeah, I probably still sympathize with Ellie more, but I feel like I can't walk away from the fact that like that's because I've spent more time with Ellie and I feel more connected to that character as a result compared to Abby. But the fact that I care as much about Abby as I do is, I think, a testament to their execution of everything. But again, I realize that that's not going to be for everybody.
Well, I will say this: it's that, and this is like I'll say this also. This is kind of my final note on the game, as a like as a final point to this. Like I will say that for me, the game acts like the narrative of The Last of Us Part 2 acts to, like, honestly, like, punish Ellie for surviving The Last of Us Part 1. Like, there are several story beats, there are several things that are done to basically, and it's this weird thing, like, I don't know why if I feel like they're overcompensating trying to evoke empathy by making her suffer and go through stuff. But like it just feels like there's so many arbitrary, not arbitrary. There's so many things that happen that they design in a way just to punish Ellie for basically living. And then it gets to the very point where, like, at the end of the day, and this is what kills me, and honestly, this is the thing that actually, like, makes me feel left empty and, like, vacant, is the last scene of the game when Ellie goes and tries to play guitar and can't because she's missing 2 digits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that right there to me is so. And also they make an emphasis of being like, well, Ellie's going out there and, like, you're supposed to be, like, have this thought that, like, she doesn't have closure or something. Like, she ended up with that last big fight with Joel. They never really reconciled, and then you find out they reconciled that night of the dance.
Yeah.
And or they started their reconciliation.
Yeah, like they were ready. Like she was finally at a place where she was ready to reconcile, and then 12 hours later, he's dead, or whatever. Like whatever
Yeah.
that ends up being.
And, like, you could argue that, like, she was robbed of the opportunity to eventually forgive him, or at least, like, eventually get, like, move beyond it and reconcile with him beyond it. But for the game then to win, because here's the reality, and this is something that I wish the game would have done as a message instead of being like, revenge is bad, okay, break the cycle of violence, okay, is if Ellie at the farmhouse with Dina, with JJ, like, clearly named after Joel and Jesse, like, my heart, oh, my heart, like, that kid, oh,
Mm-hmm.
and basically, because there's an old saying which is, a life lived well is the best revenge. The idea that Ellie is going to be living a life that Joel would want for her, which is with Dina, with the baby, on the farm, like, living a life that Joel would want for her, would be the ultimate, like, would be the choice to make for that. Tommy coming in and being like, basically being like, you promised this or that, like, Tommy being a broken, like, here's the reality is that the way that Tommy was shot, I read a really interesting piece on, like, the where he was shot is very much a, like, you can survive that, but basically over the course of time, like, your motor functions will stop working as well, and eventually you will, like, you'll die, in a very, like, very painful, very miserable state.
Interesting, because I think I texted you about this. That was one of those things. Like when Tommy shows up at the farm, my immediate reaction was, "Oh, damn it! Is this all a dream?" Because I definitely thought that Abby had killed Tommy. Like,
I thought she had grazed him or
it's
something.
just
But, like,
in how the thing is framed, it's left very ambiguous, clearly intentionally, so they could bring Tommy back. But it also is incredibly confusing. So yeah, when Tommy was back, I was like, wait, what the like? I was pretty sure Tommy was dead, and so, like, that was an extra little layer of jarring. And to the extent that, like, I I even playing through it a second time, I'm like, I don't to what you're talking about, this the whatever piece you're at, like, in just the not over examining the scenes, I'm even like, I don't know where Tommy got shot. Like, was he shot basically in, like, the side of his head? Because, like, he has, like, a droopy eye kind of thing
yep,
going on.
that
I guess.
that's not necessarily a droopy eye so much as, like, the that part of his, like, so where he got shot is, you can survive your like, getting shot in the head from there, but what ends up happening is that you have such, like, and it's this is the point, Tommy has catastrophic brain trauma, and because of, like, the nature of how they had to rescue Tommy, where they had to, like, basically, like, the way they did it is, like, they had to go back for Tommy later, and like the way that they did it,
And then take 2 weeks to get him back to Jackson, probably.
yeah, or rather they had to do something, like they had to do something, and so basically Tommy was left in like with catastrophic brain trauma for a long period of time, and as like, and this is a thing that I was reading, I was like, oh, that reminds me, because I have an uncle who, when he was a kid, had catastrophic brain trauma as a child, and to see, and for what ends up happening over the course of a lifetime of somebody with that versus somebody who's already at the age that Tommy is in his 40s going through that means that Tommy and saying like, yeah, me and what's her name are like we're separated, it like, and it's amicable. It's like, what this really means is that Tommy's put this, like, finding out where Abby is ahead of everything, and his wife is sick of it, and so it's either this or like it's either her, like it's either his life in Jackson or like
Yeah.
trying to get Joel's vengeance,
Yeah.
or vengeance
And
for
that
Joel.
like that and especially given how that whole thing started, it's an interesting twist because like he definitely didn't seem as into the thirst for revenge as Ellie did, even though he's the one that ultimately ends up leaving first. But yeah, I mean that whole dynamic was just interesting. But I mean to that whole point, like your point of like a life well lived is the best kind of revenge. That's assuming that Ellie subscribed to that, which clearly she does not, because
Yeah, no, clearly.
so that's where like when she makes the decision to leave, that is probably the moment I hate Ellie the most in this game. Is like you could have walked away from this. You could have like you have
For
this
yeah,
this wonderful life that you're setting up for yourself. Clearly, you have some PTSD stuff that you are working through, but like the fact that you make that decision to go and do this, like going back to the other point you were bringing up of like I was very compelled by the like the final image of like she can't play the guitar anymore. Her last connection to Joel is now gone because of her own quest for vengeance. Like she obviously Abby plays a role in that, but like it was a self-inflicted wound. She brought this upon herself and has lost everything because of it. And that's, an extra little bit of devastation, especially because when you get that flashback where they were ready to reconcile, like that puts her whole quest for revenge in a new light because she has now like I now look at her and all of her actions from Jackson through Seattle and even to Santa Barbara as like Abby robbed her of that chance for reconciliation that she had robbed herself of for a couple years there. Like she cuts off Joel when she goes back to Salt Lake and like finds out the truth of what happened and basically says like fuck you, we're done. And so there's like probably 2 years there where they could have been living happily and making memories and stuff like that, but she couldn't do that. She couldn't bring herself to do that. And so like she's beating herself up as much as she's beating up Abby in that whole in Seattle. Like she's definitely lashing out because at least in my interpretation, she's lashing out because she's realizing consciously or subconsciously that she like lost all this time with him that she could have had if she hadn't held on to that or if that hadn't like become between them. And now that she doesn't have that opportunity anymore, she's that much more furious because of it all. And so like I love the way this game ends because of that, even if I didn't like some of the moments that led us there.
see,
Because
I'm on
yeah,
the flip.
I would have much rather just happily seen like Ellie and Dina and JJ just like end their time on the farm and boom, that's it. And then yeah, we get a little epilogue of Abby and Lev going off and finding the fireflies or something. And so that like that extra little chapter in Santa Barbara, I didn't need. I didn't. And at the end of the day, did I want it or not? I don't know. But the closing moments of it are some of the most powerful moments in the game for me because of how they recontextualize everything that came before.
And here's the thing, I don't like. I think that how do I put this? The recontextualization of Ellie's journey, literally, like 5 minutes before the end of the game, like before credits roll on the game. Um, and then to specifically about the fingers being severed and she can't play the guitar, it's not. It's almost like I was reading somebody said it's like they compared Ellie's journey to basically like the cost of like taking a toxic person out of your life, which I don't agree with. But the idea that her fingers like got severed and she can't play the guitar, her last like real like physical world link with Joel is gone, and she leaves behind his birthday gift to her. To
which started out the game as Joel is retelling
yeah,
the events of the end of the game, the first game, to Tommy. Like he's working on that guitar as he retells that story.
yeah. It's for me in particular. It's a and like this is definitely like an artistic decision to make, and I just don't like. I personally don't feel like it lands. Is it's they're trying to tell you that the point is to break cycles of violence, that revenge is wrong, that it leaves you empty and hollow, and that's fine. That's a story worth telling, but for and it's important to note like it's not entirely fair to Dina's character that like because now she's a mother, and that drastically changes who you are as a person when you become a parent. Uh, but like also like and it brings up a question of like anyway, there's a lot of issues that I have with the way they decided to do the Santa Barbara part with Ellie, which also is a weird thing because it's like gameplay wise they're like, yeah, no, don't pay attention to this, we're going to give you a silenced submachine gun, just go through this, it doesn't matter.
I mean, like even with that silent submachine gun, like some of those encounters, like it gives you that tool, but some of those encounters are like the largest in the game, so like it still can be tough to do.
Now just let out the infected that are chained up, and they'll kill all the people.
I mean,
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, I absolutely did that, and that even touches on like one of the things that I really wanted more of in this game, and I think I talked about this in our Last of Us 1 spoiler cast, was like Left Behind introduced the idea of encounters between infected and hunters, so you could basically sick them against one another. And I played through like this game, and I just wanted so many more of those kinds of flavors of encounters.
Because they're
But you
awesome.
really only get like 3 or 4, and 2 of them are in like that last little sequence. And that one, like the 1 or 2 or 3, depending on like the 2 encounters that you get where you can basically like sick and infected on them, like the infected is still drastically outnumbered, so in my encounters at least did not take out nearly enough of the guys. Like usually they got like 1 or maybe 2 before the rest of like the crew kind of swarmed on them and took them out. But yeah, like I like the one of the first times you really get that is the like the subway section where like it's just
That's
the
such a
red,
good. That's
like you go down
such
it.
a good section.
And I love like when that came, I was like, yes, finally we get to do this, and I like absolutely just threw a bottle and just kind of watched as like the chaos reigned, and picked up the pieces or whatever. So I love those. One of the things I do like, it's weird, but one of the like at a very meta level on this game, given some of the conversations around representation in the game, like I remember day 2 of like playing the game or something. So like I'd played the game, the first night or whatever. I don't remember how far I'd gotten. I probably gotten like to Joel's death or something like that. And the next day I woke up and saw that like Last of Us 2 was getting review bombed on Metacritic and stuff, and like that the anti SJW crew was out or whatever, and I was like I was like, why the fuck are they review bombing this game? Like why is it that why is there that vitriolic response to this? And then as I played through the game, and I was like, oh, it's a game with not 1 but 2 female lead protagonists, one of whom is a lesbian traveling with her bisexual Jewish partner of color, who is mothering a child by her past Asian partner, and then the other protagonist runs around with an Asian woman and her trans brother. And I was like, okay, well now I get more of that. And then by the time you get to the end, like the final encounters are basically like the broest of bros at a fucking like like West End resort or whatever. It's like, okay, I if I were to put myself in the entirely stupid and like ignorant mindset of somebody that screams about SJWs on the internet, I get why they'd hate that game. That makes sense to me.
I don't think the last part was. In fact, actually, and this is an interesting point. Most of like because I also paid attention to the review bombs, and what was interesting is that most of them.
Oh, I mean, like
just,
by the review bombs, they hadn't gotten to the end of the game.
Yeah, no, they
hadn't
gotten to the end.
Like most of the review bombs are just like fuck it, like fuck Abby for killing Joel or whatever. I'm sure of that. But like, just again, like in hindsight, as I played through the game, I was like, oh, like those idiots on the internet are absolutely going to hate this game for the kind of representation it's including, is all I'm saying.
Hey, you want to know a great way to like piss off the internet and like piss off people in general? Like what really pissed a lot of people off, and an interesting comparison you made earlier was Metal Gear Solid 2. A lot of people were really upset and angry about that you played as Raiden all of a sudden. I wouldn't compare it to that. The thing that I saw that left out most was people who hated Jesse because in the trailer they showed it as Joel was there.
Oh, you're saying the
misdirect.
So
the misdirect in the trailer that is like people hate that kind of switcheroo. People hate that.
I loved it. I loved the marketing misdirects on this. One being like the one that, I mean, both of them came from that same trailer really, where it's like the misdirect that like had everybody thinking that Dina was going to get fridged right off the bat, and clearly it ends up being Joel that is killed in that sequence. And then that the scene of you didn't think I was doing this, gonna let you do this alone, did you? Like if you go back and watch that trailer, which I did, like that trailer is clearly Joel from another moment, not not there in that house that Jesse ends up saying that line. So, but yeah, I remember approaching that moment and then getting that moment and it being like Jesse that grabs her and pulls her in, because the trailer cuts where like you see the hand go over her mouth and then it cuts to a different shot of Joel, basically not Jesse in that house that we end up getting. It's just like it's just a cleverly edited misdirect, really, and I loved it because when that happened I was like, when the hand came over I was like, but Joel's dead, like is this going to be like a figment of her imagination that somehow just saved her? And it wasn't, and it was the fact it was Jesse. I love that. So yeah, like if that's what people were review bombing, then fucking people don't understand like how you market a game that has a twist like that, that happens very early on, and how you still show like end things.
People understood, like, don't get me wrong, like people get that. People just hate that. Like,
I mean, if
Metal Gear Solid 2 came out today, not today, because now you can't review bomb things on Metacritic in the first 48 hours.
But it's the Avengers Infinity War shot that had like the Hulk running out with everybody else or whatever that ends up not being in the like final product of the movie because of because he's in a different scene or whatever, he's in a different location when that scene occurs or whatever. Like it's those kinds of things. I'm just like I've just grown accustomed to, like, hey, marketing's probably not going to show me everything that it's doing, or it's going to try and trick me, but it's usually trying to trick me for the betterment of something. I mean, I guess that's a terrible comparison because like something like Suicide Squad's trailer exists.
Yeah, that's true. There you go.
But yeah, I mean, like I'm more open to it than clearly the angry mobs on the internet.
That is accurate. Here's like, and that's the thing. It's just and at the end of the day, it's because people hate being duped. They hate being like, people hate being like at the end, and this is where a lot of like dumb, prideful like nonsense comes from, like these review bombs, is that that people hate feeling like they're a dum-dum. Like people don't like feeling like something's made them look like a dum-dum.
Mm-hmm.
And when people feel like they've been made to look like just like an absolute maroon.
But those people should be very happy that they predicted that Joel was dead back from the first trailer. So, like, what the hell? Like, there's no winning with those people. I mean, people are going to be stupid, and they're going to be mad about being stupid.
I thought Joel was dead. In fact, my original theory was the cordyceps inside Ellie's brain, which has actually, like, instead of being a parasite, has created a symbiotic relationship with her, was somehow manifesting in some way. And I'm like, that was my first thought. I was like, Joel's dead, but she sees figments of Joel. And what are the figments of Joel?
you
It's the cordyceps basically helping her because it wants to
you,
survive.
you thought it was an Arkham Knight situation.
You know, I did, and I wanted that because I thought that would have been a way cooler direction to go in.
What did you think, Frank, of the intentional misdirects in the
Yeah,
marketing?
sorry, Frank. We've been talking for the last 45 minutes instead of letting you talk about it.
No, I definitely like that part of it, and I think like we had talked about this a little bit before, and yeah, it kind of goes into like the MCU comparison, and I'm definitely a fan of that. Like I like the misdirect, and it is cool to kind of then when you get to some of those scenes and you see how it plays out differently, or like the fact that like it wasn't Joel, it is Jesse, and then and I was happy even to see Jesse there because like even from just the brief time you got to spend with him, I liked Jesse like back in Jackson.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to put it out there. I'm not one of those people. I do love like a good misdirect, and I was also super happy to see Jesse there because Jesse kicks ass.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to make sure it was not conflated that I'm one of these people.
Well, yeah, and like, cause I'm definitely with you guys, and like, even like, I like, even though you only get to spend so much time with him, I definitely like Jesse as a character, and it was even crazy to kind of then get like we talked about it before, but the point when he eventually does die, like, and it is sort of like unceremonious, but that's even another thing I like that like, yeah, people, you know, in this world, especially like in this game, there is people who you know their name, you get to know them, and then they just get shot in a cutscene or a brief moment, and you just keep going forward because like you're trying to survive, like you have your own like things to worry about.
Yeah, there's no time to mourn.
Yeah, exactly. And then especially like one of the other moments like that that I really liked is with Manny. I don't know if we're like gonna just jump ahead here for a second, but like yeah, that was a really cool section to me when you're playing as Abby and basically you're fighting Tommy and like Tommy's like hunting you, and then I like that moment where they're like, okay, we're gonna go around to the other side, like he's in there waiting for us, and you're trying to like bust in the door like you've done like 500 times already, and it's just that moment like he comes around from the other side and just shoots like Manny right in the face, and he just dies immediately.
So good.
And yeah, that was an amazing moment because I was like that was one of the ones that like I didn't see coming really when he just gets
that was one where like we got to that point and I was like, Manny's gonna die here because I'm like I can't imagine, especially because at that point we'd seen that Abby, and they did an interesting thing in the first time we see like the confrontation where you don't see Lev there as well, so it's like you don't know who's in the room with Abby, I guess. But the fact that it's presented as only Abby that first time we see it, I was like, well, Manny probably doesn't survive till that point. So like I was kind of anticipating the death, but it does, like the suddenness of it still like hit, and I was like, that was a really cool way of doing it. And again, it like there are just so many wonderful parallels there between Ellie and Abby's journey, because that death ends up being just that's Abby's Jesse death. Where she doesn't get to mourn it because, you know, Tommy's still there as a threat. And so yeah, I love that too. Good shout.
You know, and what I liked about it, like that was my favorite part of that moment. But what I liked about that, and kind of going back to how you're kind of playing is both sides, like it was that thing like they're chasing after Tommy, and obviously we already know what happened, so I knew like, okay, well they're probably not gonna like get him or hurt him. But then I'm like, well, I don't want them to catch up to Tommy. Like, you know, I'm like, I don't want them to get Tommy. But like I
mean, when did
Go ahead.
Did you realize it was Tommy right from when they're like, there's a sniper out there and he's just picking people off?
Yeah.
Like, did you realize that was Tommy?
Marina, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I assumed immediately. I was like, oh, that's Tommy, because like, especially because like Tommy was kind of just doing his own thing like the whole time, pretty much, until you meet him at the theater. And so like I wasn't. It could have been like a Scar or someone else, but I definitely was like, oh, that's Tommy, because like there's no way it's Jesse or Ellie or Dina or someone like. So I was like, it's definitely Tommy.
Yeah, I was pretty much right there too. I feel like I was talking to somebody though that was like surprised when it ended up being Tommy. Like when you, like, who didn't realize it was Tommy until you like run out that door and basically like have that little and it's definitely shot to kind of obscure Tommy until basically you've got him up against the railing or whatever and you throw him into the water. Like you only get a glimpse of actually seeing him in that whole sequence. But yeah, I thought like so I like there were people out there that were surprised by that, in part probably because like, hey, we've been playing as Abby for like 10 hours now or whatever, and Tommy had been like such a non-character throughout all of Ellie's journey. He was just kind of like the MacGuffin that you were constantly trying to find.
Yeah, but it's
Until you finally did.
that's also when Ellie makes that critical error in her decision making.
Oh yeah.
When she decides not to go to the marina. Like, that's what I picked up immediately. I was like, oh, that's definitely Tommy, because then Jesse's gonna show up and like get him out of the marina. I didn't realize, but then when it's like you threw him into the ocean, like that whole thing was like such a, and it was the way that it was shot. I loved, because they did it to obscure him, even though like I knew it was Tommy. But the best part about that was Abby didn't, until for like a split second, and then she realizes, oh no, these trespassers are from Jackson. But she has to go save Lev, so she can't like tell anybody about it. But also by that time there isn't anybody left to tell.
Or I mean, it's also like, I mean, she's been going off on her own crusade really for this whole time, so she doesn't even know that these trespassers have like really been at, like, she hears a little bit from Manny of like these trespassers have been picking through our people or whatever, and that's her first introduction to the idea that like there's a third faction coming into play here, and it's not just wolves versus scars. But yeah, that like moment, that hint of recognition of Tommy is very much like, oh fuck, this is something I got to deal with. But yeah, we've got to go get Lev first. So yeah, I love that, again, just how a lot of those like I definitely feel like we've ragged on the game more, just and like that ends up being like the case in a lot of these kinds of spoiler casts, is like, hey, we're talking about the criticisms we had of the game, while the whole rest of the game we really enjoyed or something. So
the rest of the game's great. Like it's that good because of reason. But anyway.
Yeah, I do want to circle around and focus on some of our favorite moments from the game. So Frank, as Cameron pointed out, he and I have maybe dominated a lot of the conversation recently. So let's throw it to you first for some of your what's one of your favorite moments from the game?
Yeah, the thing with Manny and even the thing with Jesse were definitely, like, I think some of my favorite moments. I also think, I know we already kind of dove into it a little bit earlier, but I do think one of my favorite moments of the whole game is what happens to Joel in the beginning. I think that scene has like a lot of tension that like, I mean, the whole game is kind of tense and dark, but I feel like there is like a palpable tension when they walk in that room, and let alone when he goes, oh, like, I'm Tommy, and I was like, don't say your name, don't say your name, don't say your name. And he's like, and I'm his brother Joel, and I was like, God damn it, like. And then it's that, like, and you can just see everybody like tense up and change their posture, and I guess it's a good point too, because they don't know what Joel looks like, they just know Joel is there. So like,
yeah, and it's and also like we're all on the same page that the weed farmer guy was the one basically who tipped him off, right?
Oh no, I didn't know that. What is that like?
I mean that's certainly my guess, was because when you go into the library and you find the weed farm of the guy who had been out on patrols with Dean and stuff, like there's mention made of like he'd been clearly communicating with somebody, and because he had been a Firefly with Tommy. I got from that, coupled with like the flashbacks where they're like, we got a tip about Jackson, and then like how you see in Santa Barbara like Firefly cells kind of communicating with each other through like the ham radios or whatever. Like that's my takeaway at the end, is that guy before he died had kind of like put out there that Tommy, who they'd worked with back in the Firefly days or whatever, they let them know that Tommy was there, because they didn't know Joel was there when they go out. They only knew Tommy was there, and so they were going to find Tommy and use Tommy to get to Joel if they could. So Joel being there just ended up being like a perk and a surprise kind of thing. But that was just another thing that, like, it's absolutely played subtly, but especially on like a replay, like I started connecting those dots.
To make a comment off of that, I think that it's entirely possible that it was less about him tipping people off and more him reaching out to him basically.
Yeah, they didn't know he was out for vengeance. They were out for vengeance or whatever. I was like, hey, I'm a Firefly. We have a community here, and they were like, wait, who'd you say?
Yeah, Tommy Miller. Yeah, no, that would definitely ring some bells. I would say that it's more likely like he finally made a connection with other Firefly cells. Probably like when he's heading towards the end of his life, and so he does that. I'd say that was probably like I'm sure it was innocuous. I did not think that like the weed dude was a sleeper cell.
No, And I didn't mean to suggest that. No, it was just like that's how they knew that Tommy
he's
wasn't
a weed
Jackson.
farmer and a traitor to Jackson.
Yeah.
He like the dangers of marijuana, folks.
I think that,
And Snatch Bandicoot or whatever it was, whatever his VHS porn, Naughty Dog porn was.
I thought that I thought that's actually I didn't really put that together, but I do think that that is really cool, and I think that that does make a ton of sense, especially because they even already kind of build into where like he was into like electronics and stuff, and like he had all that stuff like in there. So yeah, I think he could definitely have like he probably I mean I might have just missed it too, but he probably does have like a ham radio just like in his setup there.
And well, yeah, because he taught Dina kind of, and that's why Dina's able to kind of like figure out how to make the one in the theater work and kind of follow their movement. So like the whole thing kind of tracks for both their characters, I think, which was it's again it's something I picked up more on a second playthrough than I did. Like the first time around, I just kind of took it for granted that these things were happening and was like, okay, cool. And it was the second time where I was like, oh, okay, yep, those two dots can be connected, cool. But anyway, yeah. That scene absolutely palpable. As soon as Joel like they're all very wary of what's going on, and yeah, as soon as Joel says his name, everybody turns on a dime there. Any other favorite moments there, Frank?
I mean, I feel like the game does have a lot of really great moments, and I'm trying to think because I feel like I touched on a lot of the ones that come to mind immediately.
So the one I really want to focus on, and I imagine we probably all have thoughts on it, is the birthday flashback.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, for me, is the best, most like pure joyous moment of this game. It is like the giraffe scene from the first game, like amped up times 10 or something like that for me. Especially the audio tape of the Apollo 11 takeoff. Like that whole sequence is just like there was just so much like joy and like peace to it, like because clearly it's from a time before like Ellie had let go the events of the first the first game until she sees like Liar and the Firefly logo at the end of that sequence, and so it kicks off clearly her journey to figure out what actually happened. But everything leading up to that, just the joyous little moment of like Joel pushing her into the water, and so clearly now Ellie knows how to swim, and yay, like that's a fun little like tongue-in-cheek thing. Her guessing it's a dinosaur, and then it being a dinosaur, and they like get to go through the dinosaur museum, and her putting the hat on all like because I had her put the hat on every dinosaur, including Joel. And there's a trophy for it if you put it on Joel, so that was fun. Yeah, because like if you put it on two dinosaurs, then like you get the little icon to put it on Joel, and I was like, well, I'm definitely doing that. But then you can take it back off Joel and put it on more dinosaurs, or no, you can't take it off. But there's like another hat that you can go and grab, and so you can keep putting it on. And then eventually Joel takes the hat off him and puts it on one of the dinosaurs. And like I get the appeal.
In mine,
and it was just like
mine, I either missed the prompt or wasn't paying attention. I didn't put it on Joel, but he still, when you get to the dinosaur, he takes it off Ellie, and he still like ring tosses it onto the other dinosaur.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so if you're both wearing a hat at that point, he takes it off his head and does that, and then you take yours off when you go put the helmet on, kind of thing. But yeah, then that whole sequence of just like already it was like already this is like the best moment of the game, all this fun dinosaur stuff, and then when you go up to the second level and it's her passion of space, and clearly the real reason he brought her there, I was like, this is awesome. And like the moment, because I went through like room by room and I was checking like every prompt, so I didn't even see like the capsule in there. I'm just kind of going through and like she's doing the fun facts and whatnot, and he's clearly like he doesn't know it, but he's like having fun with it and everything. And then you get into the capsule, and he's like, well, no, kiddo, you need a helmet for this. And so you go and grab like a helmet off somebody, put that on, and then you guys get in there, and he gives her like the final gift of like, happy birthday, kiddo, and she's like, what is this? And you put it on, and like you just have that beautiful, beautiful moment of her like fantasizing about going out into space. It was just like I was melting, and I was like, and it obviously you get that after Joel has died and everything. It's just like that much more devastating that like their relationship fell apart the way it does, um, and we don't get more of those kinds of moments like that. But that's like the two of them at their most pure, and I just loved that whole sequence. Like more than I thought I would love anything in this game. Really, what'd you guys think?
No, that is a really awesome moment and definitely another like standout for like just times in the game, and especially for how kind of like dark and brutal everything else is. That is really just like a beautiful moment. Like you said, it's kind of like the giraffe moment turned up to 10 or even like 11. I also really love the when they're the one of my favorite conversations in the game that's just kind of like funny is in the dinosaur moment, and he's like he says the thing about the dinosaurs about them like overwhelming you, and she's like, where would you see that? And he's like, in a movie. And then they talk about like they have the other line about the other dinosaurs, and she's like, do you see that in the same movie? And he's like, well, it was a different one, but yeah, like same franchise or whatever. Like I just like he's talking about Jurassic Park and like Jurassic Park 2.
Yeah.
Like I thought that was like a really funny, just kind of like cute, like wink and nod kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and I was like right there alongside him. I was like, yeah, no, that's a velociraptor, and then the actual velociraptor skull. I was like, the movies lied to me. God damn it.
Oh, you didn't know that?
I mean, no, like especially given like how old I was when Jurassic Park came out,
Okay.
I probably just took it for granted, and then I have never gone back and like re-examined or any of that kind of
How'd
stuff.
you
So
feel?
yeah,
How'd you feel like when they said that velociraptors had feathers?
I mean that I was fine. Like that I have seen like come to the forefront in
Okay.
like in modern times, but like the size of the Velociraptor and shape of the Velociraptor, that being like the difference, I was like, oh, that's like, huh, okay, yeah, no, I definitely would have been in Joel's camp there, um, of like thinking that first one they look at in the lobby is the Velociraptor. So, yeah, it was just like, oh, yep, okay. Clearly, I didn't know everything. I trusted it. I trusted in movies too much, especially because that movie had a dinosaur consultant. So, screw that guy for lying.
No, they knew it was happening. They just thought the term
I know.
velociraptor would be easier to remember than the
Yeah,
actual name of the dinosaur.
yeah. But yeah, it was a just another fun little moment in that whole sequence, and then obviously, yeah, that sequence ending with the, you know, the more horror aspect of going into the like busted off wing with the guy that clearly is like gone crazy and written a whole bunch of shit on the walls and stuff, and then ultimately has like you see the Firefly logo to bring back the past and everything. It was just like I loved that. I love that sequence from start to finish, really. And it made me like wish there were more of those. But then I'm sure if there were, I wouldn't have found that one as special. Any highlights from that, Cam, you wanted to touch on?
Yeah. I definitely felt like both of those were highlights for me, but for I think the key point of this game and like one of the most wonderful, absolutely terrific moments of this game is the farmhouse scene with Dina
Mm-hmm.
and JJ. And as you're walking around, you're in like looking through rooms, putting on music, dancing with Dina and JJ, uh, like the whole thing of where you guys are just doing chores around the house, and like there's that moment where Dina needs to be doing something, and so Ellie says, I'll just take him, don't worry." And like she takes him, and so she does she takes him out to the tractor. She dances with him. She does these and it's honestly like part of it broke my heart because I know that this is exactly the kind of life that Joel would want her to live. And he's not here to see it. But on
Mm-hmm.
this at the same part of that is also like to see Ellie be a mother was really really amazing. And for her to like she like for her to have this family and you know like guiding the sheep into the barn and all of that and like that
And making her bad puns about sheep and stuff.
yeah like all of that and but like they live on this wide open area in Wyoming and they have this farm and they're ranching and it's like they have like the sun's like just that look over the valley is so gorgeous. and like you know that they're gonna pack things up and head into Jackson in the winter to avoid the hordes, and like this is a life worth living, and part of me wishes that there was a scene when it wasn't Dina that walked Tommy out, that it was Ellie, and at some point Ellie and like this is how I would have ended it with them on that farm, and telling Tommy like this is the life Joel would have wanted me to live, like not hunting her down in Santa Barbara, like this is the life I'm gonna live because that's what Joel would want for me, and telling Tommy go back to Maria, like because that's the life Joel would want you to be living too, and to have that kind of be the point, and which is like the point that it ends on anyway, but it just makes, and that's another thing that I think is just like a frustration of mine.
But yeah, she wasn't ready for that yet. She wasn't there yet. She hadn't gotten her closure yet with Abby. She was still
But it's closure.
fearful that Abby's around the corner.
I didn't think it was
like
closure.
she ended the fight that day. But what's to stop her? Just like Ellie, what's to stop Ellie from going back? Kind of thing. Like
I didn't see it as that.
there was no
see it as
culmination there.
I did not see it as a. Well, also like the way that it ended was. I will also say this: the entire last part of, and this is a frustrating thing for me, is that in a way, I would compare it to, and this is not my favorite scene, but because so when Ellie kills Mel, and then realizes she was pregnant, like Ellie has a breakdown. She has a panic attack. She can't breathe. She's she has a total breakdown, and it ruins her, and like totally demoralizes her from like continuing on with whatever they're going to be doing in Seattle.
Yeah. But then before they are able to leave and go back home, Abby shows up and throws a wrench in that, and then it becomes.
But then
I need vengeance again.
Well, no, for me, this is what it gets to is, they're in the basement. She has Dina. She's going to kill Dina. Ellie tells Abby, like, please don't. She's pregnant. And then Abby looks at her and says, good. And I'm like, oh, this is the difference between, like, this is the real core difference between the two of them. And honestly, that's when I solidified. I'm like, okay, so they, like, that's an interesting decision to make. You're trying to tell me that, like, this, but.
But Abby is still, like, Abby just found her pregnant friend that Ellie killed. Like, Abby doesn't know that Ellie didn't know Mel was pregnant when she died. So like Abby is responding in like, good, then it's an eye for an eye. You killed my pregnant friend. I'm going to kill your pregnant friend. Like, fuck you. Why the fuck should I care about that? And it's Lev that gets her to stop.
Yeah, it's Lev that gets her to stop. But like but I mean, this is really where I'm coming from, is that the way that the theater fight ends, instead of ending on a more distinct point that could have ended the conflict, they designed it to keep it going so that they could have the Santa Barbara chapter. And I just didn't agree with that decision. But it is what it is. The game is what it is. And the farmhouse, but back to the original point, the farmhouse scene for me is to me the farmhouse scene is up there with the dinosaur museum. Like these two really incredible moments of just living in this world, and to me it's such an awesome, like, it's just such a great moment in that game. That really, like, another thing I enjoyed though was being on the Seraphite Island.
Okay.
Like when you
and seeing kind of their community kind of layout and stuff.
Yeah, like I thought it was,
and the culture.
The culture, the because you're spending so much time in Seattle, where you're used to like skyscrapers and buildings and apartments. By the way, some of the apartments are some of my favorite moments too, like the Warhammer dudes who live across the hall from the immigrant and her daughter.
Yeah.
And like they're like camaraderie and like, hey, like it's only the four of us, but like, hey, we're gonna help take care of you and your mom because she's sick and she can't go out and do stuff. and you need to be there to take care of her. Like, we'll all rely on each other, and like
Mm-hmm.
we're neighbors, and it's like WLF,
That
yeah.
Yeah, that reminded me. There was I want to give a shout out to. I think when we first talked, I think I mentioned like I don't think you. I think this was like when I was handing off the game to you. I think I mentioned like an anti-ish kind of story.
Yeah, is that the anti-Ishmael story?
Yeah, the no. So the anti-ish story was I don't remember the character's name or whatever, but it's the
Oh,
guy
the
that
Boris. It's Boris. The
yeah, there you go, Boris, who like clearly like had everything taken away from him and he started fucking up with all those people, and basically like he leaves the people in the garage that like if you open that up and you get like he specifically basically like tricked people into going in there because they had like robbed him of his wife or whatever it was. And I like I remember seeing that and being like, oh, like this is
they were gonna
so I dubbed him the anti-ish in my original notes
yeah, no,
for the
he
game.
100% is. I loved his story was so cool because, and I actually thank you for mentioning that, because that entire level is one of my favorite levels. Um,
Going through the
yeah,
town
going
there.
through the town there, but specifically because of Boris. Because the first thing you find about Boris is you find a drawing from his daughter that shows him looking like a superhero because he's the protector of the town. And you see Boris.
Oh, is that the same guy?
Yeah, that's the same guy,
Okay.
because you see his
Yeah.
archery trophies.
Yeah,
He's
okay.
an Olympic
Yep.
he's an Olympic level archer. And
Yeah, I didn't put those two together. That's my yep.
yeah, no,
Good shout, good connection.
he does that. But if you read through the notes, you realize that this town has been relying on him, and some people are afraid because their name were on the reserve list for being like, basically they signed up to be Federal Reserve people in case Fedra needed like people to like fill the ranks. And the WLF got the list, and so the WLF is going around house to house, taking people out and killing them if they were on that list. And so you find out like, okay, well the WLF is not as like, they're like, the WLF is going to be here instead of Fedra, yay. And Boris is like, I don't know about that. And then they find out that Boris's like anti-Fedra, anti-WLF thing feeds into his daughter, and she starts doing graffiti on WLF propaganda, and that leads to her being taken and shot in the street by WLF members. And Boris is just like distraught over it, and is basically told by the community, you can't do anything about it. Like you can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so he starts going off and like murdering like assassinating Fedra, or not Fedra, WLF members. And so you read the notes and you find out the community that he's protected, that he's led, that like that he's lost his daughter, his wife was already dead, all this stuff. And then you find out that the community is going to betray him. They're going to out him to the WLF. And so he does that thing where he locks them in with the infected. Turns out he got bit too. He doesn't care. He writes a note to the person, one of the people who left town, that said, if you come back, like, this is what happened. And then you end up fighting him, and that's how you get the bow. And so you have his bow, and it feels so poetic after that moment to just be like taking down these WLF like fascist stormtroopers as you're just like systematically like rolling through them. It's like, it's so cool, so cool.
Yeah.
There's so much about this game that's so good and so cool. I know I've been definitely the most negative about it, but I do love this game for its gameplay aspects, whether it's when you're playing as Abby and it's physical and like you're punching people and you have that kind of more physical aspect to it, or it's Ellie where you're like this little stealth ninja, like sneaking through levels and just like murking people left and right. Like, it's the gameplay in this game, and that's why I didn't mind gameplay aspects of it being too long. Like that first day one Seattle where you're going from place to place and marking it off your map. Like, I loved that. I loved that section of the game.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun. And like I could very much feel the like Lost Legacy or Uncharted 4 like that was the Madagascar section from Uncharted 4 clearly. Or the because one of the things we talked about, I think, in one of our like off air just chats about the game, and it might have just been me and Frank talking about it or something, was the doesn't matter which like gas you go for first, the first one you go for is always going to be empty, and you get the gas can, and then you get the gas at the second location.
I don't know that.
Yeah, because I basically did it one way the first playthrough, and then the second playthrough I switched it up, and yeah, that's basically how it plays out. And I kind of figured that's how it played out, and so that's very much like in Lost Legacy, where you have like, oh, you've got to go to the three different points, but you can do it in whichever order you want. It was very much kind of like it had that same kind of feel. But yeah, in that I wanted to touch on one because one of my other favorite moments was going to the music store and doing the acoustic cover of Take On Me,
Yeah,
right.
so good.
which was just beautiful. I tweeted this out as like because I didn't want it to be tied to a spoiler, and so I actually tweeted out after I had also seen it as I was rewatching Chuck, because Jeffster did Take On Me at one point in that series, and so I basically tweeted out apropos of nothing, kind of jokingly. I did not until playing that in Last of Us. I had always grown up thinking the lyrics were "Take on me, take me home," and it
Oh,
wasn't until like watching it and seeing it on the with the subtitles and stuff that was "Take Me On," just because just because of how I've always heard Aha's version of it, kind of thing. That's what I was hearing. I was hearing like take on me, take me home, is how I heard
you were
that. So
confusing me with "Take
I
Me
was
Home
like,
Tonight."
I mean, a little bit, yeah, probably, but yeah. It was just like, oh, that certainly makes more sense for for the song, and also like I don't think I'd ever like listened to the song and the lyrics that closely before. It was just like I love that music video, so I would throw that music video on, and the song was catchy and fun. I didn't actually like pay attention to the song itself until Ellie's there singing it. And yeah, it was just like a beautiful little moment. That was another like that was clearly another like giraffe like moment.
Mm.
That was a lot of fun to experience and play through, and I appreciate that like it's completely optional. And if you're not, I mean, like it's weird because like I can't imagine not going through and trying to find every section of
Mm.
of that open area Seattle map. Also, I loved and Frank and I talked about this. You can find Nate's ring in the bank job gone wrong. It's like that's sitting in there in one of the in the safety deposit boxes. You can see the Sick Parvis Magna thing. So
Oh
that was a
yeah,
nice
I
little
did see that.
nod. Um, and you can get a precursor egg in like the little shop in
Mm.
Chinatown is where you can find that in the game. And I love those little like they were clearly also going to be Easter eggs I was going to have to find for like the platinum anyway, but I love that I managed to find them both kind of just naturally enjoying the game because I was like going through every area. So the people that like only went to like the synagogue and the courthouse and missed completely like the music store and all that stuff, I'm like like you're robbing yourself of like so many great moments in this game if you're not going and exploring all those things and just like the conversations they have. But yeah, that whole sequence. I mean, like the music store was certainly the takeout, but even the like going into the synagogue and hearing kind of like getting that like all that backstory on Dina and kind of her character because I was like, oh, that's I didn't realize Dina was Jewish until like that sequence. And and yeah, I just loved like I loved downtown Seattle. Uh, and I like it. Again, I'm like I was of two minds of it, where I was like, I wish there'd been like a similar sequence for Abby,
Oh.
where you could kind of experience everything, but at the same time, it was like, well, I already felt like the game was long in the tooth by that point. So if they'd given me another like big open area where you can just go do a whole bunch of stuff, I probably would have hated it. So I'm glad they didn't give me that thing that I maybe thought I wanted. Um, but yeah, that was like specifically the music store was just like one of those beautiful things. Did you guys play around with the music at all? I don't know how musically inclined either of you are, but did you play around with like the playing with the guitar?
Yeah, I played a couple of like so I don't think I've ever mentioned this to either of you, but I used to play bass.
Okay.
So like I do know like, and that's a different instrument, of course, but like
Mm-hmm.
I know enough of like just string, like working with strings to like know what some of the notes are, and so I was able to like do a couple of like fun little things, but I was not friggin' what's his name from Blink 182 streaming the game.
Mark Hoppus,
Yeah,
yeah.
Mark Hopper streaming the game and like playing Blink 182 songs on this acoustic guitar. Like I was
I,
not doing that at all. I definitely messed around with it, but I will say that there's a version of this game in like the vast multiverse where it's just exploring Seattle with Ellie and Dina and Cinnamon.
Shimmer.
Thank you, Shimmer. Oh, that is
Yeah.
definitely Ellie's horse name. That's or like a horse's name. That's for sure.
It's better than
Um,
Chalice.
it's yeah. But Shimmer and Dina and Ellie are just like going through downtown, like just all of Seattle, and like WLF can like stay in the arena. I just want to explore the rest of Seattle and just find fun, cool things like this. And like, there's a version of that game that exists somewhere out there in the multiverse. But
Yeah,
gosh,
real quick, that reminded me one of the elements, like you when you mentioned like you really liked the Seraphite Island. Like I remember getting there and then like that being where like the Space Needle became like a
hmm
landmark kind of thing, and thinking like I don't like I when I went to PAX a few years ago, I went to the convention, and I also love that you can kind of go to the convention center.
Yeah, love it.
In the especially as somebody who like is missing or is going to be very sad about missing PAX West this year. I love that like they had a show going on and everything. And then like people tweeting out like PAX West 2020.
Oh, I will say,
But like
I was gonna say, when I was on the Seraphite Island, by the way, never killed
uh
a single like civilian person. Like I snuck
okay,
through that.
like you snuck through
Yeah,
all the
I
area.
did feel
Cool.
right because like this is their home. Like I'm not gonna murder people here. Like I'm
Hmm.
not actually Abby.
So
I'm
there you
not
go.
gonna
Yeah.
do that.
I but when I saw the Space Needle on the Seraphite Island, I was like, wait, like I've been to like I've walked from my hotel that I stayed at a couple years ago to the Space Needle in the same way that I walked to the convention center. So I'm like like I'm very confused by the geography of Naughty Dog
Yeah.
Seattle here, where like the Space Needle is suddenly on a completely separate island. Like I just got very thrown by that. I was like, I have no idea what's going on
I,
here.
I
And it took me out of the moment a little bit, but at the same time I was like, oh, I wondered why I hadn't seen the Space Needle.
I was totally with you on like all that because like I think we were even on like that walk together and like I definitely was like
Yeah, it was like you, me, Kaylee Zeiger, and like we hung out with Gia at the Space Needle that year.
yeah, and that was a great time and like it was funny to me though because yeah, like I that was like I think my first time in Seattle and then both of us have been there like multiple times since then and I feel like I do have like a decent lay of the land. And so it was weird when like some things were identical like when you go outside the conference center and like the overhead walk is like identical and then like the
Yep.
doorway is like identical but then like yeah like the Space Needle's nowhere to be found and like the skyline like it's like way off to the side and then like what I also thought was funny too is like it's not like I wanted them to make this any bigger than it already was but when you go into the convention center like it's not nearly as big as the actual convention center is like there's a wall that is just there
Yeah.
that like no that
Yeah.
keeps going for like forever basically like that's a whole other section
Yeah.
of the center you just never get to see.
Yeah. Yeah. It was still a lot of like it was fun seeing those like recognizable landmarks, but also yeah, it also ended up being a little confusing when they weren't where I thought they were supposed to be. Um, but yeah, I mean, I the exploratory moments of the game were a lot of fun, but also I mean, like I did have a ton of fun with the combat of the game. Like we touched on a little bit earlier, like the I remember the whole idea of like, am I gonna want to fight the dogs and stuff? And yeah, like you said, Cam, like you were like, I don't want to fight it. No, those dogs immediately become like, no, I strategically, I just need to take these dogs out because it makes the whole rest of the game that much more difficult if you
Yep.
don't, because they'll pick up your scent trail and it becomes really hard to lose your scent trail and all that
Did
stuff. So I was like, nope, no patience for this. I'm just gonna just gonna like throw on a silencer on my pistol and shoot a dog in the head, and I'd be like, I'll feel a little bad about the yelp, but I much prefer that to the dog constantly just like running up and chomping at my arm or something.
Did you guys know that if you like throw a bottle or a brick or something, it throws the dog like off your trail? Like it like resets.
Yeah, yeah. They mentioned that in the like in the brief little tutorial you get of like, hey, that's how you get a dog off your trail. But I was just like, that was a much tougher resource to manage than just grabbing the gun and shooting the dog. So, or especially like in that first area where I feel like where the dogs kind of get introduced, like you also maybe that's like the first place where you get like the trap bombs or something like
Yep.
that, or it was like the one of the first places I had to like use the trap
Same.
bombs. So I definitely like remember going into a building there and just being like, all right, the dog's gonna follow me, so I'm just gonna lay a bomb and then like keep moving and just let the dog walk right into it. And sorry, Alice. I guess that none of those were Alice, but it was definitely like I'm trying to survive and I can't have this dog on my tail. So and I think it was Brandon Gann that I like DM'd with, who's had similar thing. Like he was like, I hate these dogs so much, because he was trying to play through like completely stealthily or whatever, and
Yeah.
they made the stealth moments just infinitely harder. Um, what did you guys think of again in terms of like gameplay, the Rat King boss at the
Um,
bottom of that Abby faced off
I forgot
against?
to bring this up. That is a terrible, terrible. Like, I love the idea. I love the concept. The execution, especially in a game that feels like The Last of Us Part Two. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there is there is a definitive like way that that game is being played for like 99.9% of the game, and the Rat King fight
Mm-hmm.
is just so like in conflict with it.
You need to unload all of your ammunition into this
Yeah,
guy.
and
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the most annoying of the fights, but also like, hey, it's a boss fight. I
yeah,
get
it's a
it.
boss fight. Like I get that, and
Uh,
I'm unloading all my bullets and all my fire into it. But it's also it kills you in like it'll likely kill you in one hit.
oh yeah,
It
yep.
has an enormous hitbox. It's not like here's the problem. It's not well designed as an actual applicable boss fight. In concept, it's super cool. I love the idea of like Patient Zero in Seattle amalgamating into like getting stuck like this and like becoming a rat king of all the different kinds of cordyceps. I think that's super cool. Um,
I love how it's introduced
yes.
too. Is that like if you go into like listen mode, you can see that thing hiding behind the door, and you're like, oh
Yep.
fuck, this is going to this. I do not look forward to fighting this thing when I turn this power back on. That's clearly going to be what
Yep.
happens. And then like when you get back there and like the thing is just completely busted out, and you see like the husk of where it was, it's like, oh yeah, this is not going to be fun. I personally enjoyed the the different like tenor that you needed to have in that combat, because you still definitely like need to, especially like yeah, after you die the first time, it's like, oh, this guy's clearly just going to kill you in one hit. Shit. It becomes like this mix of, okay, run away from him, like sneak into, like jump over things or hide behind things or whatever, get off a shot or two when you can, and that's just kind of like constantly be moving. Like fortunately, the first time especially, I still had like most of my ammunition, so I was able to largely just like clean him up without having to like scrounge around in that area. But the second time, for whatever reason, I was having a lot more struggle with it. I don't know if I played it on like a harder difficulty my second time through, or what the case was, but I just had like way less ammunition, so I did have to like run away into like a side area to get some ammunition and then kind of like duck around or whatever, and just like avoid and yeah, like it, you definitely had to, like, it was very bullet spongy. But I liked that as just like, hey, this is unique from everything else I'd done in the game, and not in a way that like a lot of times you'll see like I was not a huge fan of like the end of Ghosts of Tsushima that I just finished, for some of these kinds of reasons of like without getting into spoilers in that, I just didn't like the the way some of that final boss fight was like laid out. Whereas this, in part because it's not the final boss fight, felt like it was just an interesting, like, hey, it is a boss fight. You're not going to get too many of these in this game. Like, obviously, like the first game really only had like the bloaters, and this just basically seemed like a bloater to the next level. Um, so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that fight and just the whole tension leading up to it and coming out of it. Really.
I thought it was a really cool moment, and I definitely can agree that yeah, I mean it's not the most amazing boss fight in the world, but I also think I mean you guys will probably maybe agree with this, but I think Naughty Dog just kind of struggles with boss fights a lot of the time. Um, but like
Fair. Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
great point actually.
well, that's like yeah, because I feel like they constantly, at least like once per all their games, you're gonna get like at least one boss fight. But I feel like most of the time that ends up being like one of the worst parts of the game, especially like God, I mean, we don't need to get this deep into it, but like I feel like Uncharted 2 is amazing, and then that ending boss fight, I think it just sucks. Like I think it's like the worst part, but that's where you kind of get some of that here. Even though I think like I agree with what you're saying, Trevor. Where I think it's a really cool idea, and I think there's a lot of cool tension there and like build up. And one of the things I did really like about it is the way that like as you're killing it, like the other, because it's kind of like multiple people like mutated together that like they
Yeah.
break off and like crawl away or like, and then you kind of have that like second fight after it, which like I
Hmm.
struggled more with like the second fight, like I because
Yeah, we're
go
when you have like you have the bloater half of the Rat King and the Stalker half of the Rat King. Yeah, I was like, fuck the Stalker.
yeah, exactly, because like that's where like I felt like I was just running around in circles the whole time and like grabbing, there's ammo all over the place, and I was kind of like you, like I was already stocked up and I was just grabbing everything I could and like vaulting over stuff and just running away, and then it would turn around, like take my pot shots and then keep running. And yeah, like that's not the most like engaging or dynamic fight, especially for how awesome the combat in this game was, but it's definitely like I thought it was a cool moment for me. Even I wish that I think I probably would have even gotten more out of it if I didn't have that spoiled for me. Like I only had a small selection of things ruined for me ahead of time, and that was one of them, because like forget who, but somebody published an article like this is how they made the crazy rat monster in The Last of Us, and I was like, cool, thanks for
Mm.
sharing that around. Had no idea that was in the game. Like
Yeah, I realized after the fact that I'd seen like I was kind of annoyed that like Neil was like spoiling most of the shit. Like he was the one putting out the
Yep.
spoilers in his like responses to things. I was like, what the like you were the one that made the whole YouTube video about like, hey, you haven't seen everything. What and it's like, so stop like retweeting your team's concept art or something the first week of the game being out. And yeah, one of the things was like I saw the mocap kind of like of the three actors on top of each other or whatever doing. I didn't realize it at the time probably, and I didn't like put it together until after the fact, but like yeah, realizing that like those kinds of things were coming in, I was like, this didn't need to be posted right away. Like yeah, I concur on being annoyed by like how people were just nonchalantly putting that kind of shit out there,
yeah, because that was
and the people involved with the game.
yeah, exactly, because that's like I'm with you there, because like I follow Neil and I follow a bunch of the other people, like the voice actors, and just like love their work from before, and so it's like, and then even seeing like friends and just other people, and it was like I understand that like they're like nobody was sharing like the stuff about like Joel or whatever, like that's what everybody was like, okay, well don't talk about that, but it's like everything else completely fair game, who cares? And I'm like, okay, like cool. Like I just, yeah, like there was a couple random things I kind of had ruined for me, and it was one of those things where even if it wasn't like there wasn't context to it, but then when you get there, I go, oh, like this is what this was, where it would have been like way
Yeah,
more
I
surprising just naturally getting there.
which again, like I had that like I wanted to tweet out the night I played and got to the Take on Me section. Like I wanted to tweet out that thing of like, oh, I've always heard "Take Me Home" as the lyrics in that, but I was like, I don't want to put that out there because obviously like people know I'm playing Last of Us, so that's going to come across as a spoiler of The Last of Us, and like that and the genre of like no context spoilers where people just throw a whole bunch of like images out there that like if it's like cool, but also if you don't know you can infer, and some of that's just like very blatant, and some people are just really bad about that, and I'm like, don't be like rule number one, don't be a dick. Like what the hell? Like nothing, you did not have to share these things. If you wanted to talk to people about this game, like do what I did. Like every night Brandon would basically post like a very vague tweet that like he was actually like one of the really good ones about it, where it's like even if you knew what he was talking about, like, or even if you'd played the game, like because I was well ahead of him, I was like, I don't quite know where you're at based on like what you've put out there, so like, but I would just kind of slide in and DM him, and we'd chat about the game a little bit, and where he was at that point or whatever, or with you, Cam, like where I would just kind of text back and forth, because I never wanted to like inadvertently give something else away. Like with Brandon in particular, Brandon was very excited at one point early on in the game that the dance scene of like the night before everything happens hadn't been shown. It was all just like referred to. He was like, I love that like they just allude to that stuff, and you don't like have the full context of it unless you saw the trailer from the one of the first story trailers or whatever. And having already beaten the game at that point and knowing that you will eventually see that scene near the end of the game, I didn't want to ruin that for him, so I just kind of like smiled and nodded and played along with, yeah, it was really cool how they approached that idea or something. But I was always like hyper mindful of like, okay, where are you at, so I know what not to say whenever I wanted to talk to other people about it. And so that's like, it's one of the things that like I love that we're getting to sit down and have this 3+ hour conversation, because I haven't engaged with the game or with people about the game in really any kind of like concrete sense, in part because I never went out and sought out like other spoiler casts, because I was like, I don't, if I'm still going to eventually write this review, I don't want those other reviews or those other spoiler casts to like influence my own impressions of the game. And so like I still never went back and like listened to Kind of Funny talk about it, or What's Good Games talk about it, or like the people that I want to engage with like their takeaways from the game. I just never actually sat down and did. So like this is really the first time I'm talking about the game at length with people outside of like a few back and forth kind of text exchanges and stuff. So because this is certainly, and again, like one of the things I think may have led to me not wanting to like, or not being compelled to like finish the review, is like I think this is a much more interesting way to discuss the game and do like a review of the game, so to speak, is like talking about it with other people and figuring out, well, what did you take away from this versus what did I take away from this, and sharing kind of sharing our reactions to it, as opposed to here's what I took away, blah 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 blah, and then immediately somebody comes back and is like, well, you completely missed like this, very overt theme or something, and be like, you're right, I did not get that. So yeah, it's like I'm very much enjoying the conversation, obviously, that we're having. But at the same time, we have been going for 3+ hours, so we should probably wind down a little bit here. Yep. We specifically were like, Cam has a hard out at 2, and we're already like, oh yeah, if we start recording at 10, we'll be fine. And so we're nearing that point. So any last things anybody wants to kind of really touch on about the game?
I will say this. I think that don't bother posting your review. Post this podcast up as a review instead. We'll give it a 9.0. That kind of splits the difference between all of us. And
I'm very much look forward to, obviously, Logan not having played the game yet. Like, he's another person I very much look forward to actually like sitting down and talking with when he finally sits down to discuss it, because of his very deep love for the first game. I like his is one of the like, every time I talk to him, I'm like, play the damn game, Logan. I want to talk about this game with you.
Dude, Ghost of Tsushima's out, man. He's playing that, I see.
It is.
I'm playing it.
Yep.
It's a good game.
Yep.
Some might even say it's a phenomenal game. I wouldn't, but anyway. No, I will say that I think that this is The Last of Us Part 2, I think, tries to do a lot. And it tries to do things differently than games that have come before it. I think it's extremely ambitious with a lot of its decisions, and storytelling and character development. I think it takes people to emotional places that they don't like, that aren't necessarily wanting to go towards. And I think that there's a lot of bold choices that are made, even if I don't agree with all of them, or I don't think they land particularly well, or if they will land well at all. But I do think that in a almost similar vein, we brought it up earlier, but in a similar vein to a game like Death Stranding, which is very like completely different on so many levels, but in a way that is, I like seeing, like, and here's the thing, I like that Naughty Dog took these risks. I like that they made certain decisions. I thought that there were definitely parts of the game, like, oh, this obvious platform is going to fall out from under me, and I'm going to have to reroute my way, and how I'm going to go about it. I'm going to have to go through this much dangerous route that I said I didn't want to have to go through before. Yeah, that's there. But I think that there is some really awesome moments of this game that made it worth playing. But just that made it worth playing. This is a game worth playing, and I definitely suggest people do so. And that includes you, Logan. Get your butt on it.
Yeah, I hope Logan has listened to this entire Spoilercast without having played the game, and we've just completely ruined everything for him.
Just cut out that bit of audio at the
Frank,
end and just send it to him.
Yeah. Frank, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I just like I really enjoyed the game. Like I know kind of even like maybe even like the first one, like it's not perfect, but I definitely like I enjoyed it a lot and I think one of my biggest takeaways I think too was like from the combat and just how dynamic and real everything felt. Like I felt like this was one of like the realest video game worlds I've ever just like walked around in from even like breaking glass and like the animation changes depending on like what you're holding and like what where the glass is and even like some of the like the platforming and stuff where like there's just it's all stuff that's like built in the world and like one of the things like there's that Home Depot area and
Mm-hmm.
you have to like climb through the shelves and like even just like I know it sounds small or it probably sounds dumb, but it's just things that kind of blew me away. Where like in a normal video game, these are just stock shelves that have like invisible walls that you can't interact with. But here it's like no, this is like real. Like you can just climb up here and crouch through and like crawl around. And even the way you could like crawl under cars and like under train cars and stuff, and like everything just felt so dynamic and so real that like this is one of those things where I was like, this is what I hope we get from like next gen games. Like I hope people copy some of this stuff, or I hope this is kind of a feeling we can get in games going forward of just how awesome like everything feels and how everything reacts to what's happening. Even if you like push an enemy backwards, they'll shatter through the glass. Like, and there's just so many cool moments. And I also I know like we're wrapping up, so I don't want to get deep into it, but I also I did enjoy the boss fight with like Abby at the end. Like
Mm-hmm.
like I
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, it's a,
I'm realizing. Yeah, we totally
oh geez,
completely didn't
yeah.
talk about the ending of the game.
yeah.
So yeah, let's really dive into the ending of the game there.
Like
um,
I
yeah.
agree with some of what Cam said, where like I do wish it almost they had just done it a little bit differently, and it just kind of wrapped up with the farmhouse, and you could have had Santa Barbara as just like a kind of an epilogue where you get to kind of see them go their separate ways, and I think that would have been probably maybe a good choice. But honestly, like I did enjoy what we actually got, especially for the point where like you just see how like her and Lev are just like tied up, and like they're just like so like her hair is cut and like she's just like ribs now like they've just been hanging out there for like who knows how long and I thought it was a really great fight. It was brutal, and like the way you're just like you have the knife at first and you're just slashing her and you're just watching her arms get like cut up and then like I thought it was a brutal fight. I thought it was really intense and even really liked that it started off with Abby being like I'm not going to do this, like we're like she's
Mm-hmm.
grown past this and Ellie is like still basically keeping this fight going. And then I do like how even it all kind of wrapped up in the end. Like I definitely thought like that was amazing. Kind of going to my comment earlier where I was like Naughty Dog struggles with boss fights. I was like I thought this was kind of like one of the better ones they've probably done.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the and I think it really boils down to a couple of key points for me with the ending. One, Abby, like Abby being like, "Well, I'm over this. I'm done with it." It's like, well, you don't get to make that choice, Abby. You like when you decided to come to like for me, I looked at it. I was like, "Well, Abby, you don't get to make that choice. Like this is not where things like you got to choose in to like anyway." Let me back up a bit here.
I mean, she gets to make that choice for her, but
Yeah,
yeah, Ellie doesn't have to like abide
yeah.
by it.
I will say this that uh, and I mentioned this earlier when I talked about Ellie and like her journey in this game is sometimes there are points that are like there are parts of the game that are deliberately meant to just what I feel like are done to
Punish her
yeah
for
punish her
surviving.
for surviving. Like this is that you like oh uh you survived Seattle, cool, you're gonna have PTSD. Oh, you want to try to like address that and like find closure about Abby, great. So you go through this entire like honestly the entire Rattler section was just not like I just felt like Santa Barbara in general as like a level that you play through rather than just like a cool epilogue is just it's just such bloat to the game at that point. And then like because the entire time through Santa Barbara it's Ellie getting like wounded over and over again to the point where okay, well now she's wounded enough that she can't just like take out the weakened Abby right away, right? Like it's done to this point where it's like she's just like they put her in this position so that then they can be like, well now she's gonna break the cycle, and the game won't let you. because once again, you're deprived of the option of a choice, and
I mean, yeah, they're not like,
and no, it's not
just like the first game. They're not making you make a choice. They're telling you the story they want to tell you.
They're going to tell you the story they're going to tell you, but like it's just I don't know. Like there's just nothing about that last fight as far as like story wise. I guess the way I put it is I don't find like the end of Last of Us Part 2 leaves me feeling as vacant as the farmhouse was at the end of it. Like this is just like it's an empty ending to me. It's empty.
And do you think that's?
I think that's intentional. Let me put that out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I feel that by design.
Yeah, and the thing is that I personally am not a fan of empty endings. Like it follows the theme that they want to tell of like revenge doesn't give you closure. Revenge gives you leaves you empty. Revenge leaves a void.
Yeah.
And like that's clearly the message they want. Like that's clearly the story Neil wanted to tell. That is the direction they went with it. But if I'm being honest, if I'm really being honest here, a more empty ending would have been you kill Abby and then you leave Lev to whatever is going to happen to Lev. Which is likely Lev dies.
And then we get part 3 where Lev comes after Ellie back in Jackson.
No, except he finds that like Ellie left everything and now she's like old and alone in a farmhouse, or I don't know, maybe she's already the whole thing about it is like this, and once again we get back to I saw the writing on the wall the moment Abby went back for the kids was Abby will survive. No matter what happens, Abby will survive because that's the story they're trying to tell.
See, I didn't think it was as cut and dry as that. I definitely thought like they could go either way. Like I
never thought that after that
point. Especially given the first game, I could have seen them doing the ending that you're talking about of like Ellie kills Abby and walks away and still has like an emptiness to her back at the farmhouse or something like that. You know, she's lost her like I could have just as easily seen the ending that we get but with Abby dead. And so Ellie's fingers are still gone. She thinks, everything, like she thinks she won, but then she still has lost,
her last connection to Joel. Yeah, I will put it this way. If they had done that, what that would be as a story is a tried and true story of what is the price of revenge? What is the price of vengeance, the cost of vengeance? That's not the story that Neil decided he wanted to tell. He wanted to tell a story of, like I said, it leaves emptiness. Even though Ellie made the right decision to let Abby go in the end, the decision she's not rewarded for letting Abby live.
Yeah, I mean, well, is there a reward for? Well, we also get into and I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on this,
let me
don't have time to spend. Yeah. But what are the theories of what happens afterwards? Like, where does Ellie go to? Obviously, we get in the new splash screen that comes up after the end of the game. The assumption is that Abby and Lev make it to Catalina Island to regroup with the Fireflies, which I didn't catch until I saw somebody mention it that was Catalina Island. Catalina. Because I just don't know I've been to Catalina Island a few times. I just didn't remember the landmark of that building out there on the island shore. I just thought that was it's weird that we're looking at the resort or something like that.
Because the resort burned down
in Santa Barbara.
The part of the,
right.
We talked about this in our text messages. The part of the resort that looks like that burned down.
I mean, it was burning, but didn't burn down. It would be my argument to that. But yeah, it was just oh, okay. So that's an allusion to where that ends up. But yeah, where when Ellie leaves the farmhouse, is she going to Jackson to try and mend fences, or is she just going off to the wilderness to be on her own? Who knows?
My personal theory: she goes and honestly, because here's the thing: she can't what's she gonna tell Tommy? I went out there and in the end decided that I couldn't kill her. Is that something that Tommy?
I mean, she could go and say, she has suffered enough. I've seen what she suffered. like she is worse
the
off.
fate
But is
worse
she?
than death.
Let
Yeah.
me ask this. Like,
I mean, yeah, Tommy's not gonna be happy
but
with that.
isn't
But
Tommy
like,
and that's kind of the roughest part is that Ellie is the one that told Tommy they needed to go, and that convinced Tommy to go, but he wanted Ellie to stay because that's what Joel would have wanted. But
I mean, she could have just lied to him, and continued that cycle and just been like, "Yep, it's done."
she could totally do that, but but that also is that just her perpetuating the lie and the violence and all the problems that that Joel also perpetuated at the end of the game.
I mean,
but let me.
I mean, yeah, especially because that answer doesn't work for the answer she needs to give Dina.
Yeah,
so
no, it doesn't.
yeah.
Here's the thing: is well, Tommy, it's arguable, but Jesse is dead. He died. He doesn't get to see his son. He doesn't get to do that what would have been probably some really funny co-parenting between the three of them, as it's you guys are in a relationship and I love and support you guys because I think you guys are good together, but also it's my kid, and that would have been some fun exploration and storytelling, but because alternative parenting is a cool vehicle to explore stuff and look into, because it's more common than you would think. And it shows us some diversity in that. But anyway, I digress. But back to the point, though, Jesse's dead. Tommy will, slowly have his brain basically just slowly deteriorate and die on him, and leave him a shattered emotionally, physically, and mentally. And they don't have, the medications needed to help treat, or maybe they do. I don't know what Jackson's pharmaceutical capabilities are. But presumably I would imagine that it'd be very difficult for them to produce the kind of medication needed to keep brain function going. And then Ellie's lost two of her fingers, her partner, the family that she could have had is lost, and I mean, this is also the thing that I know this is the craw that gets stuck in people's throats. Is that Abby gets to live out her life with Lev, and in what is presumed to be a successful reunion with Fireflies. And sure, Abby suffered throughout it. She lost the people closest to her, Owen, Mel, all the others.
Yeah, again, I look at that as
it's a question of there's people who are wanting a story that ends with some sort of equilibrium or some kind of balance to it, and that's just not what Naughty Dog is going to deliver, because that's not what the kind of story it is. But also, there's no, I guess at the end of the day, there's no catharsis for a story like this. There's not supposed to be. But but what Ellie does after this is it's who knows? I don't know.
I look at it as I said kind of earlier, Abby is constantly throughout this journey a few steps ahead of Ellie in the path to redemption, or whatever it is, if redemption is what it can be considered. And so Abby getting a more or less happy ending gives me at least a sense of hope in my mind that Ellie will be just a few steps behind that too, and that she's been able to put this aside as Abby had, so hopefully Ellie can now go back to Jackson, reconcile with Dina, and make things work, and have the happy ever after that she, if not deserves, that we want for her, maybe. So that's ultimately my takeaway at the end of the day is they leave it open for interpretation, and I will choose to interpret that, hey, they can both be happy eventually, because I want happiness out of these characters. I want happiness for these characters who have lived such shitty lives,
Trevor,
and had such shitty
Trevor,
things happen.
That's not
them.
how this universe
I want
works.
the best for people. I know, but I mean, but there are hints of happiness, within all the tragedy. These characters, especially they had 4 years of happiness in Jackson basically before the events of this game start, and to varying degrees, but Ellie things were good, and things can go back to being good when they're not on this quest for revenge. Like when they are just kind of like trying to build a community and survive with one another, I think they can have that happy ever after potentially. They can die of an old age like the weed farmer guy. Frank, any other final thoughts that you wanted to bring now that we kind of like touched on the ending there?
No, not. I don't think. I think we've pretty much hit on everything I can at least think of off the top of my head.
Okay. The last thing I wanna kind of leave as my closing thought is something that I was putting in my review, and I think I've talked about maybe a little bit with you guys kind of offline, is the idea that especially as white guy that sees myself as a protagonist in far too many forms of content, be it games, movies, TV, whatever the case may be, I loved the diversity of this cast, and the and how it wasn't like I did not feel like it was throwing it in my face at any point. It was just these are the characters and these are the trials and tribulations they're going through. I remember when when the Scars yell out Lily for the first time, thinking, "Oh shit, Lev is trans. That's awesome," and that they don't dwell on it and they don't try and like it doesn't seem to me like they're trying to make a point out of it or something like that. It's just this is an aspect of their character and their character is on the run because of that aspect because it doesn't fit within like their society, but like Abby accepts it. And so to kind of the whole like Abby is a terrible person, but she has moments like that where she doesn't say, well, I'm going to call you Lily because I'm going to dead name you and to be a dick. Like she's like, you're Lev, then that's good enough for me. I love that. And I obviously, as a straight white guy, can't at all speak to how effectively that is as representation. And I've seen a lot of articles out there talking about does this do representation well? What does this do for representation? And I can only speak from my experience and say that I appreciated that, and I hope that it's not coming from a place of I'm appreciating it for the sake of appreciating it, and I hope it's coming from a genuine place of like I appreciate this because it's a story I don't get to see told. Obviously I want to see more of these kinds of stories told, and so I appreciate that like that this is one of those stories, and especially I appreciate that this is one of those stories in one of the biggest games that has ever been put out, one of the most high profile games that has ever been put out. The fact that we get those various elements of representation in this story, I think, are incredibly important and powerful for the games industry as a whole, considering like I can look at nearly 100 years of television or film, I guess not 100 years of television, but like 100 plus years of film now, and haven't seen stuff to that degree necessarily prevalent, or certainly as prevalent in the biggest movies of all time. In TV, they're hard to come by. In theater, it's hard to come by. The closest parallel I can give you is like Hamilton, which again took a millennia plus of theater productions to give us something that tells that kind of diverse level of story. At least in Western media, I can't speak to every other culture that that has come and gone over time, but like white stories have been the dominant narrative for so long that I love that I get to exist in a time where that's becoming less and less the case, and that we're getting more and more stories of different voices telling different things. And as somebody who loves the video game medium as a passion, because of its interactivity, because of its relationship to the audience that goes above and beyond even the relationship that live theater has with its audience. I love that like these kinds of stories are being told in video games at this level. It's because obviously there are, I'm sure, a ton of other indie stories that broach these subjects, and many of them probably do it better and have better representation. But the fact that Sony, one of the big three companies, is coming out there and putting the full weight of their company behind this story of these more marginalized voices is, I think, really, really cool. as somebody that wants to see more of those stories. And again, like I hope that if they miss the mark, that it's that people are recognizing that missing the mark but still trying is better than not trying at all. I hope. And again, I'm coming obviously from a place of privilege, but at least that's how I interpret it. Is that even if they, screw up some things here and there, it's better that they're trying to tell these stories and they're trying to bring in these voices. One of the things we also didn't talk about was like the amount of accessibility and disability, like accessibility options that they put into this game, which is another thing that absolutely they should be celebrated for. Is it perfect? No, but it's leaps and bounds ahead of what has come before. So I think that is certainly something to be celebrated, and I hope that these kinds of stories continue to be told, and continue to be told at this level, and that just becomes a way of changing the perception of gaming as a medium for storytelling, as gaming culture, as like the toxic nature that we all know it to possess. I hope that these kinds of stories will open people's eyes and change minds, even if it is in small doses here and there. So that's kind of my final thoughts on the game. I don't know if anybody has anything else to share. If we can just kind of wrap up there. I will throw it to you, Cam, I guess, as the not as the token, LGBTQ plus of our team or anything like that.
Yep, okay.
But like, representation
matters. It does.
It absolutely matters, and I don't know if you in your recent kind of
I got it.
Journey in the spectrum, if that impacted you in any particular way.
Yes, it did. On several points. One thing that if you had asked me a couple years ago if I would eat a Bigot sandwich, I would tell you no, or I would have told you yeah. If it's fresh cut steak, heck yeah. Now that I've come out, and if I being honest, I look at what Seth saying what he said and did what he did at the beginning of that game, and just even without knowing the full context of what he said and everything, when Ellie decides she doesn't want to eat that sandwich and she's being made to make nice with a bigot,
Mm-hmm.
and she basically is just fuck that guy, he's all that stuff about it. It's yes, I felt that on a level, because I've had to, even though I've only been out for I'm out at a much more acceptable time, I've had to deal with some just flat nosed bigot, not flat nosed. I don't know what the right, just flat out. That's the word I'm looking for. Flat out bigotry. Just from what I've observed, what I've heard, what I've talked to people with, it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating, and to see. But I will say, on a level of seeing representation like this, it's difficult because I don't fall into, most of these what's being shown and portrayed. But I will say that it means a lot that there's a character like Ellie who is so beloved by gamers of virtually every aspect of any sort of political spectrum. People have just loved her as a character, and her being gay, being a lesbian, is something that is so empowering to see. Not only is it a female protagonist, but it's a female protagonist who, her sexuality is known. They don't do anything to they do such a great job of making it feel, and I'm going to use this word very loosely, normal, that it feels super impactful. I think one of the reasons why I associate so much with that farm scene is because, ideally that's what I would like. I'd like a partner. I don't know if I know I don't want a kid, but I would want a partner. I want a life where I can live a happy, healthy life with somebody I love in a way that is to see that represented there, even though I'm not a woman, and I'm not a lesbian, or just generally even bisexual. to see that as like this is idealistic. This is kind of like this amazing representation of like what is a feeling of perfection, and it's so domestic and it's so nice that even if I don't really want that for my future, seeing that represented in such just a healthy, wonderful way is so impactful. Lev as a character, the trauma he goes through because of his choices, is from, and I can't speak to it on a first-hand level, but like what you're like the dead naming, the I mean, Lev was literally going to be like a child bride to one of like the old men of the Seraphites, of the elders, and in order to escape that and be true to who he is, he he sacrificed everything for it. And to see that is, and like to see like the happiness that he finds, even though it's like it's only, and that's another reason I don't like the Rattler scene. I don't like that, like that Lev and I like that Lev and Abby had this like cool cool sibling awesome like thing that they were doing, and I hate that it got interrupted by a bunch of dude bro slavers from SoCal. Because seeing Lev like wearing wearing non-Seraphite clothing and just like having looking just like any other guy was so cool. And I don't know, there's something really awesome about that. It's awesome to see the level of diversity and the level of and I think what you were trying to say about In Your Face, it's not pointed out. There's nobody points out like, look at all this diversity in this game. Oh, all this diversity. You want to know who talks about the diversity in this game? People who are against diversity in games. People who are for it are just like, oh, there's diversity, or cool. Everybody else is like, oh, they're like maybe not even really picking up that it's diversity, because guess what? That's real life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the crews of people that like hate on this game are the ones who are saying like it's being shoved in my face. Like, no, it's not. Like, if you think this is being shoved in your face, then you have a very skewed version of the world.
You must. It's either if you live in anywhere but like a small town in the Midwest where there's only like 100 people living where you live, you have no reason to feel like this is being like that's the like that the shock of that being put in your face. Like if you're from like this small rural town of only 100 people, sure, maybe. But if you live anywhere else in the United States, like this is normal. This is out there. Like this is happening. Like this is a representation of what the world actually is. Not in the zombie apocalypse part, but well, we're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the representation that we see here. I mentioned at the top of the show, I love the representation that Abby brings for other female body types. Getting focus put on them about like, and like it's not a bunch of Malibu Barbies, you know, or a bunch of like Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 like Lara Crofts up in here anymore. There is a diversity of body types and age groups of, you know, you have a younger teenage girl like Yara, you have Abby, you have Ellie, you have Dina, like you have these different, like we're seeing such a diversity in just design outside of hourglass figures or unrealistic proportions. Like it's such a cool thing to see this level of just basic diversity that we're getting able to see here is awesome. And I feel weird being like the spokesperson of that nerdy site about this issue.
And that's and I didn't mean to throw that on you. It was more just like
I could have,
given that you have a different perspective than I do on diversity and representation in that.
Here's probably what I should have said instead of that long diatribe. It's super cool.
Yeah,
Agreed.
It's super cool. And I agreed. Thank you, Frank. And you talking about it did remind me. One last incredibly minor nitpicky thing, but this is like the nitpicky thing I tweeted out like shortly after beating it. That is always bugged, or that bugs me about this game, in a game that has like, I mean, completely 180 in terms of what we're talking about, but in a game that is so focused on the details of this. It drives me crazy that the coins you collect are not at all accurate to
right?
like when they were released and stuff. I'm just like, and I don't know if it resonated with me because like my mom collected the quarters that they were coming out, the state quarters, but like the state quarters came out 99 through 2009, 5 quarters a year, basically every year, in the order of statehood is how they were released, and most of the coins you pick up in this game are 2002. So I'm like, well, most of them are just wrong from there. Somebody mentioned after I mentioned it to them that like the designs on them aren't even like accurate or right. And the first one you get is the dad's like, oh, 1975, we don't have one of those, or 1978 or whatever. It's like they weren't doing them in 1978. So like I'm like, why? Like if I had one question for Neil Druckmann, it would be like, why did you make that choice? Why
could you have not done 10 seconds of Googling to find out how state quarters were put out, please?
And like I can understand like the design having to change if there's like a legal reason for that, but just like the fact that pretty much all of them were like 2002, and not all of them, but like most of the coins you pick up in the game, it's like 2002 is the year. I'm like, that's the wrong year for this quarter. Like I just, it drives me crazy. And it drove me crazy every time I was picking them up. I was like, why are these wrong? Like for everything else that this game is doing detail wise, why is this detail just so not paid attention to? So that's my one question for you, Neil Druckmann. Why with the quarters? If you've listened to this episode 3 hours and 50 minutes in or whatever.
We're about 4 hours in, guys.
Thank you for dealing with all of the rest of the stuff we've talked about. But why with the quarters? Why was that a thing? Anyway, that's gonna do it for our spoiler cast here. Long story short, like we all think this is a phenomenal game, but we all clearly had some issues that we wanted to discuss about it. So if you have not already checked it out, why did you listen to any of this? If you did, let us know what you thought of the game. Kind of share your thoughts with us. Maybe not in a public setting for anybody that hasn't played it or whatever, but let us know what you think. Feel free to reach out to me, DM-wise or any of that kind of stuff. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of That Nerdy Site Show. Thank you guys for sitting down with me. Let's go around the metaphorical table to plug anything we have to plug. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Cameron?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to this question that I thought of that I think it's more to be funny or fun. Is Abby a Karen? There you go. That's your question.
Is Abby a Karen?
For the week.
Interesting. Okay. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Frank?
Nothing to give a shout out to. I'm just glad we could sit down and talk about this great video game and kind of share our thoughts together. Kind of like you said, haven't really been able to talk about it with anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, you can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. I will give a shout out to, again, thank you guys for sitting down with me for almost 4 hours to discuss this, even though we were like, no, we won't go 4 hours.
I told you we would.
I knew this would happen.
Yeah. You're like the longest episode we have is just a little over 3 hours. I was like, well, we're gonna beat that. It's gonna be like 4 hours.
Yeah, no, and when we hadn't gotten through the twists at like the 2 hour mark, I was like, yep, this is definitely gonna be a long one. But thank you guys for sitting down, because it's, I mean, like if nothing else, if nobody listens to us, I'm glad we at least got to sit down and chat about this kind of stuff, because I love sitting down talking about video games with you guys. So you can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, and you can check out thatnerdysite.com for all of the latest content from us. If you liked what you heard, once again, you can rate, review, like, subscribe, maybe even consider supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of the show, where the three of us for this month sat down and talked about here are all the things we're missing, or here are some of the things. I'm sure we didn't cover everything, but here are some of the things we're missing in quarantine, in these quarantine times. Some of the things that we missed from the before times. Thank you again, guys, for joining me. Thank you, audience, for listening, especially if you stuck it out all this time. So shout out to you, Brandon and Gan. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.